Chapter 992. It's not convenient for you to run around with a lot of gold and silver, and it's easy for others to target you. As for the ticketing shops in the Yun Nation, I have roughly understood them. There are crooks mixed in with the honest folks, and it's very messy. With these tractors and national highways, long-distance transportation will be greatly enhanced in the future, and there will be more cases of large transactions in different places. Therefore, Dayo wants to set up its own bank. It's called a bank. As soon as Renbachian's voice fell, everyone's hearts skipped a beat as they secretly pondered what he meant. Normally, those ticket companies wouldn't dare to play tricks on families like theirs. After all, the scale of the ticket shop wasn't big, and it wasn't very strong either. However, if the person in front of them cheated them of their money, they wouldn't be able to reason with him. Could it be that the other party wanted to rip off a layer of skin from them? Renbachian looked at everyone's expressions, chuckled, and said, "Everyone, don't worry too much. It's not compulsory. I'm just taking this opportunity to say hello to everyone. As for this bank, it will be established in Lan City, Pingdu, Wangjing, Suiyuan, Qingping, and Juyan. Although there were only 6 cities, 5 of them covered most of the affluent areas in the Yun Nation. As for Lan City, this was usually the final destination for these merchants. For the time being, this was enough. As for the reputation of the royal family, you can rest assured. I don't care about that little bit of silver. In addition, the bank would issue paper coupons of varying amounts. The value of a paper coupon was equivalent to the value of the silver indicated on the paper. This aspect would be explained in detail later. When you deposit gold and silver in the bank, you will get paper certificates of equal value, ranging from 1 to 1,000 taels of silver, which will be enough for you to deal with any kind of situation. We don't charge you for depositing gold and silver in the bank. Only the delivery of goods in other places would be charged. The amount of your deposit determines the level of your customer. The higher the level of a customer, the lower the fee for the delivery. Renbachian maintained a faint smile throughout. Nowadays, bank deposits pay interest. However, the people in this world had never heard of such a good thing. If he gave them interest, they would probably think that he was plotting something. After all, these families and merchants didn't believe in free lunches. Waiving the fees for their deposits was already a great benefit. Following Renbachian's words, everyone had their own thoughts, but no one dared to speak under such circumstances. He was just thinking about his own thoughts. Their dealings with others were all through the path of business. However, the aboriginals would never take the business path. They would always take the knife path. Therefore, even though Renbachian had set up such a ticketing shop, they couldn't help but feel uneasy. Everyone, you can't possibly suspect that the royal family covets you for something, right? We wouldn't dare, we wouldn't dare. If you don't dare, then it means that you have doubts. Renbachian teased. How could that be? We can still trust the royal family's reputation. That would be great. No matter what you think, the reputation of the royal family is much stronger than those small banks. Moreover, do I covet your money? It's just that it's more convenient for large transactions to circulate. What I see is the whole country. I hope that the emergence of the bank can bring changes to the business model in the future. Renbachian laughed. After trying out the convenience of the bank, Renbachian believed that they wouldn't reject it. Even if someone really felt that it was convenient to transport a large amount of gold and silver to trade, Renbachian would make them feel that it was inconvenient. How could there be no bandits in this day and age? The introduction of a bank, which was actually a money house, was just the first step. Next, the salaries of the various ministries and officials would be distributed through the bank. Next, the salaries of the craftsmen and workers would be distributed. According to the original agreement, it was time to distribute some salaries to the prisoners of war so that they could get used to this kind of work. It was much easier to carry out a task from top to bottom than for others to do it. Using paper money as the standard was naturally a matter of both advantages and disadvantages. There was no need to talk about the advantages. Nowadays, a large amount of copper was used as currency in the market, which made Renbachian's heart ache. As for the disadvantages, one would know just by looking at the countries with serious inflation. However, Renbachian already had plans to introduce a gold and silver standard. Linking the currency to gold and silver would prevent big trouble in the future. Based on the current social development of this world, it was more suitable to use gold and silver as the standard. There wouldn't be a problem for at least a few decades. Moreover, when Renbachian came to this world, he was curious. The currency used on Earth was precious metal, and it was actually the same in this world. In particular, when he found out that the humans were exiled from the other side of the 60,000 mountains, Renbachian was even more puzzled about how gold and silver were used as currency. It wasn't until a recent discovery in the laboratory in the mountains that he made some conjectures. There was another substance among the gold and silver in this world that was difficult to separate. It was named the singularity, which meant the beginning. This substance, called the singularity, had a very unique characteristic. It could absorb the energy released during the transformation of substances, including potential energy, chemical energy, and electrical energy. The discovery of this strange substance excited everyone in the laboratory, especially the experts in physics, chemistry, and material science. Each of them immediately became mad scientists and didn't care about anything other than the laboratory every day. This was a huge discovery when they came to this world. It was said that according to the people in the laboratory, they often heard them muttering something like, "Nobar River." Renbachian couldn't help laughing when he heard this. This group of people seemed to have forgotten something important. However, it was good that they could do their jobs well. Although he hadn't conducted any more experiments, after learning about the existence of this substance, Renbachian guessed that the use of gold and silver as currency was probably the currency system that humans had on the other side of the 60,000 mountains. If that was the case, this substance would probably be very useful. Huge. Alright, everyone. That's all. I've said what I wanted to say. As for the time of the auction, it will be tonight at the small arena in the east of the city. Please be prepared. Renbachian got up and prepared to leave after finishing what he needed to say. Your Highness. Renbachian turned his head and saw a man in his 30s. If he remembered correctly, his name was Qing. It was very similar to the name of his good friend. However, what really caught Renbachian's attention was that after he revealed some ideas, the Qin family was the first to transport a large amount of food to and from the two places, setting an example for the other families. Renbachian had always liked people who were so sensible and tactful. Do you still have any questions? When will this bank start, Your Highness? Our Qin family trusts Your Highness. 3 days later. Renbachian gave him a smile. How could anyone not like such a sensible person? First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 993. The last batch of 30 tractors will be sold at 200 taels each for a total of 6,000 taels. Everyone is aware of the rules. This is the last batch of tractors for tonight and also the last chance to bid. Those who are still empty-handed, don't miss it. Following the announcement from the stage, everyone perked up. The auction was held in the arena. Other than the large area, everything else was very simple and crude. However, no one cared about such things at this time. In the previous 20 auctions, 470 tractors had been sold. Some people achieved their wishes, while others were surprised. However, the price far exceeded the starting price of 200 taels each from the first auction. 5 tractors were sold for a total of 14,000 taels, which was 14 times the starting price. This exceeded many people's expectations and set the tone for tonight's auction. Although everyone knew that the price wouldn't be as low as 200 taels each, the starting price of 2,800 taels each was still beyond many people's expectations. The last batch of 30 tractors even caused some big families and chambers of commerce to compete for them. They were flaunting their wealth, but not to the families who knew them well, but to Zhao Prince Consort, who was sitting in the VIP room at the top. 67,000 taels. 83,000 taels. 110,000 taels. Is there anyone who wants to raise the price? The person standing on the stage was a member of the Jing tribe. At this moment, he scanned the people sitting in the audience with a smile. He knew that 110,000 wasn't the starting price. The previous round had already reached 160,000 taels, and the price for this round should be even higher. Sure enough, as soon as he finished speaking, someone raised his paddle again. When the dust had settled, this batch of tractors was sold for 175,000 taels of silver. This time, the average price of the 500 tractors was close to 4,500 taels. The total price was more than 2 million taels, which was equivalent to 30% of Dao's annual income. Even the people who waved their gold to bid for these tractors couldn't help but envy his ability to amass wealth. This also made many people feel that Rinpoche's money house wasn't used to cheat people out of money. With such an ability to amass wealth, there was no need for him to do such things at the expense of his reputation. Especially when the other party was the royal family. Qingji heaved a long sigh of relief. Fortunately, he had acted early this time. Although he didn't bid for the 30 tractors that were targeted, he managed to bid for a batch of 20 tractors. If he really waited until the end, the family's bottom line wouldn't be able to take down any batch of 30 tractors. No matter what, he could report back to his superiors this time. These 20 tractors were an admission ticket. Just when the crowd was calculating their gains tonight or regretting not making their move earlier, the auctioneer on the stage spoke again. Everyone, the 30 tractors just now were the last batch of tractors, not the finale of tonight's show. What comes next is the highlight of the night. As soon as he finished speaking, many people's eyes lit up. There's actually an important show tonight. He didn't know what it was. One had to know that those tractors had already been sold for more than 2 million taels of silver. The auctioneer kept everyone in suspense. Soon, the final highlight will appear in front of everyone. A group of women from the Jing tribe came to them with plates in their hands. The plate was made of wood and covered with a red cloth. It was hard to tell what was inside, but it seemed to be something very thin. When the red cloth was removed, the answer was revealed. There were only 2 pages of paper on the plate. Or rather, it was a map and a painting. Everyone picked up the drawing and painting, and their eyes narrowed. The drawing was a map of the Yun nation. The entire Yun nation was divided into 10 parts and covered with different colors. Among them, the central and eastern parts of the Yun nation had the smallest area covered by each color, but they were the richest areas in the Yun nation. What did this map mean? The painting was of a house, and there didn't seem to be anything special about it. The only thing that caught people's attention were the walls and windows of the house. One of the walls was completely made of glass, and sunlight shone directly into the house. There was a strange-looking chair with a semicircle at the bottom, and an old man was lying on it, reading a book. There was a teapot on the coffee table beside him, and outside the room, a child was squatting there with a palm leaf fan to boil water. Just by looking at the painting, one could feel the leisurely and carefree aura of the old man. Another thing that caught people's attention about this painting was that it was too realistic. It was completely different from the paintings on the market, as if a real scene had been cut out and put into the painting. What did this painting and this picture represent? After a moment, someone's eyes lit up. This painting wouldn't be meaningless. The only thing that caught people's attention in this painting was the glass-like wall. Was it related to this? Was it the finale? Everyone gradually had their own guesses. If it was really as they thought, it could indeed be considered the finale. However, what was the meaning of that map of the Yun nation? The auctioneer standing on the stage smiled and said, "I'm sure everyone has seen the items that you have won. Everyone must be guessing what the finale of tonight's show will be. Now, it's my turn to solve the mystery for everyone. Tonight's grand finale is the agency rights for these crystal-like, large-scale glass products that can bring light to everyone. The reason why it's called large-scale glass products is that this includes the rights to sell glass windows, glass doors, glass walls, glass roofs, and even glass houses and glass boats. Glass is a great discovery made by Zhao Prince Consort. Since the invention of glass, it has replaced the original paper windows and doors. Following the auctioneer's incessant bragging, everyone's faces were filled with surprise. Those who had been to Lawn City naturally knew about glass. There was no need to say more about its benefits, and the market for this thing was naturally extremely huge. However, only Zhao Prince Consort and Dayo's glass factories knew how to make such crystal-like things. Although some people were tempted, no one dared to have any ideas about it. They didn't expect that this auction would actually involve glass. The question now was, what exactly did the rights to sell mean? Everyone could understand it from the literal meaning, but they wanted to hear the other party's explanation. One had to know that the actual meaning of one word could make a huge difference. Moreover, everyone was only guessing at the moment. In order to let everyone feel the changes and interest that glass brings to life and to let glass enter thousands of households, Zhao Prince Consort has decided to auction the rights to sell large-scale glass products to all of you. As for the agent, that is, the right to sell the products in this region. As long as you have this agency, you will be able to continuously customize the glass products you need and sell them. As you can see from the map, the entire Yun nation is divided into 10 regions, which means that there are a total of 10 rights to sell. In this region, all of you are the only agents. Only all of you can sell and customize these large-scale glass products in this region. No one else will intervene. Everyone, I don't think I need to tell you how much profit this is going to bring, right? This is the only industry with countless prospects, and it's the only one in this region, right? In order to ensure an adequate supply, Zhao Prince Consort will build a glass factory near Pingdu City to supply sufficient goods to all of you. Everyone was ecstatic. Before they came, they absolutely didn't expect such a good thing to happen. Just as the auctioneer said, if one monopolized the entire market in a region, everyone would fight over the prospects and profits. There was definitely no shortage of sales for things like glass. Even if it was just ordinary glass windows, as long as there was enough of it, it would be enough to multiply their net worth several times. As for the quantity, there was no need to consider it at all. How many wealthy households were there in the Yun nation? How big of a market was there? So far, this market was still unoccupied. The only thing that puzzled everyone was that their target this time was the tractor, and all the gold and silver they brought had been used up in the auction just now. Then, the auctioneer's next sentence greatly dispelled this doubt. Zhao Prince Consort has taken into account that the rights to sell for a large sum, so he doesn't require you to pay up after the auction. As long as you send the money to Lawn City or the banks in Pingdu or Wangjing within a month, you will be able to pay up for this auction. Chapter 994. The competition for the regional distribution rights for the 10 glass products was much more intense than the previous tractors. Even if the tractors weren't bought this time, they could still be bought in a few months to 6 months later. As for the dealership, there wouldn't be another chance if he missed this opportunity. Of course, there was a time limit for this distribution rights, 3 years. However, as long as there was enough production, the market would be saturated in 3 years. For ordinary people, filling their stomachs, getting married, and having children were the most important things. The difference between glass and paper windows wasn't within their consideration. The target group for this product was the rich families of the Yun nation. 3 years was enough to change the appearance of all the windows in their homes. After 3 years, although there would still be a demand, it would be a steady stream. There was no one present who did not understand this principle. As a result, this auction gave Renbochin a satisfactory answer. 13 million taels of silver. This was the price of the distribution rights alone. In the following years, they would bring him a steady stream of income. Renbochin left the arena with satisfaction. Although he didn't need to be present for this, he was still very interested in the first investment fair that he organized. That's right. In his opinion, this was actually an investment fair. It was easy to transport small-shaped products like glass cups to the Yun nation for sale. But if he wanted to sell glass windows, it would be more troublesome. He might as well sell the distribution rights and let the people of the Yun nation do this. He could easily reap huge profits. After 3 years, the formula for the glass could also be thrown out. There was no need to keep such things that didn't require much technology in his hands. Not only glass, but many technologies would also be thrown out after he made the biggest profits. Changing the world required the efforts of the people of the world, not a single person who had to do everything himself. After returning to the palace, Renbochin heard a yell before he entered the bedroom. Woo, 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 woo. It was Hua's voice. Outside the hall, Zhu Hua, who was wearing silk clothes, was leaning against the wall and dozing off. However, her sleeves and skirt were rolled up. She preferred to wear short skirts and sleeveless clothes, and the outfit she was wearing now made her feel too restrained. Hearing Renbochin's footsteps, Zhu Hua's eyes were hazy. When she saw Renbochin's face, she suddenly shivered. Greetings, Principal. Renbochin was still a deterrent to Zhu Hua. It probably stemmed from her experience of washing toilets for 2 of her 4 years of schooling. A black shadow was swinging back and forth in the air of the hall. There were a few ropes hanging in the hall, and Hua was holding onto the ropes, mimicking Tarzan. Upon seeing Renbochin enter, Hua cheered, let go of the rope, and pounced on him. Splat! She lay face down 2 meters in front of Renbochin. Renbochin felt the pain just by looking at it. Honeysuckle raised his head. There were no traces on his face, but his small face was full of grievance, and his eyes were full of tears. Renbochin didn't go forward to hug his daughter. Instead, he covered his ears with both hands and retreated out of the hall at lightning speed. Wow! A cry that was loud enough to tear the roof off spread throughout the entire palace. After a while, 2 flowers finally calmed down. Renbochin poked his head into the hall and saw Lu Hua sitting on the floor, sobbing and wiping his tears. The Empress was sitting on the sofa with a calm look on her face, eating fruits from time to time. Your Majesty, is this your biological daughter? Renbochin asked. Yes, but I didn't see you catch her, the Empress said with a faint smile. Renbochin spread his hands, picked up his precious Hua, and carefully prevented her from punching his chest with her little fists. I was thinking about something just now and was a little distracted. Renbochin expressed his innocence. The Empress glanced at him from the corner of her eyes. This excuse wasn't sincere at all. Boo-hoo. Hua's face twitched, and the corners of her eyes drooped. She looked like she was about to cry again. Hey, Hua, you are already a big girl. It's time for you to learn to face reality and setbacks, Renbochin said sincerely, and his face was full of love. I have never seen a father like you, the Empress said sarcastically. Which father have you seen? Renbochin asked. The Empress immediately fell into deep thought. At least she had seen her own father before. Even though she couldn't see him most of the time, he was always busy, always very dignified, and very fierce. However, he was still good to her. She remembered that she once broke a bottle of his precious medicine and got beaten up. Do you know, my heart hurts when I beat you up. But after I beat you up, my heart feels much better. After thinking about it, the Empress was slightly depressed. Forget it, let's not talk about this anymore. The Empress shook her head and chased away the depression in her heart. She was afraid that if she continued thinking about it, the good impression that the late Emperor had left in her heart would disappear. How's the auction going? Your Majesty, guess how much silver did we win this time? Renbochin immediately laughed. This was a number that could surprise the Empress. One had to know that the income of the imperial family was only about 100,000 taels of silver a year. To describe the imperial family of Deo as unlucky was a little insulting. To be honest, those chiefs were much wealthier than the imperial family of Deo. Renbochin laughed as he put honeysuckle on his neck. Then, he felt two small hands wrapping around his head and twisting it to one side. He was scared out of his wits and shouted, "Honeysuckle, let go of me." If she were to twist him off. Renbochin didn't know if the ointment in this world could save a person whose head was twisted 360 degrees. Renbochin pulled the little fellow down from his neck and slapped her butt. Did I say that? You're not allowed to hit my chest with your little fists or twist my head. You're not allowed to hit my stomach with your head and act like a spoiled child. Woo! The little fellow was shocked by Renbochin's stern words and expression, and her eyes were full of tears. You scared her. The Empress said faintly. She scared me just now. Renbochin was still a little shaken. You have been slacking ever since you returned from the 60,000 mountains. In the Empress's heart, Renbochin's cultivation had always been a big problem. However, to Renbochin, cultivation was for the sake of marrying the Empress. Now that he had married the Empress, the importance of cultivation was greatly reduced. As for personally stabbing people with a gun, Renbochin was quite excited for a period of time after experiencing the thrill of being unparalleled. However, it didn't take long for him to put this matter aside. Of course, there was another important result of cultivation, which was to prolong one's lifespan. However, Renbochin felt that it wouldn't be a problem for him to attain the spirit will level. To others, the Tongtian Gate was a hurdle that would allow them to become a dragon overnight if they succeeded and fall into the abyss if they failed. However, for Renbochin, it could be smoothly passed. As long as he cultivated slowly, he would attain the spirit will level one day. Then, he would just have to wait for the medicine on Earth to reverse aging and prolong life. After much difficulty, Renbochin managed to coax Honeysuckle and threw her to Zhu Hua to rest before the two of them continued their previous conversation. How much? The Empress's voice was slightly higher. The tractor and the dealership for glass products, 15 million taels of silver. Renbochin stretched out his 5 fingers and waved them in the air. That's equivalent to 2 years of the previous imperial court's income. The Empress sighed. Seeing how Renbochin easily obtained 2 years' worth of income from Dao's imperial court, the Empress began to feel a little unbalanced. Just the glass products alone will bring back more than 10 million taels of profit in the next 3 years. Renbochin stretched out 2 more fingers and sighed. Now, we have the money to build the new palace. The Empress suddenly lifted her leg and kicked Renbochin off the sofa. What are you doing? Renbochin fell to the ground in a daze. It's nothing. I feel much better now. After the Empress finished speaking, she thought about it and laughed again. Then, she burst out laughing. Chapter 995. He had just looked for an editor to edit it. He had thought that he had written more than 1,000 chapters, but it turned out that there were only 972 chapters. The messed up chapter names of The Pretty Boy of the Empress's Family had been changed. Please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 996. I heard that you robbed more than 10 million taels of silver last night. Tong Jingye mysteriously whispered into Ren Baqian's ear. Tong Jingye wasn't the only one who was shocked by this news. The others were the same. After court was dismissed, Tong Jingye saw Ren Baqian returning to the palace from the academy and immediately pulled him aside. The others also slowed down a little and pricked up their ears. It's for sale. Remember, it's for sale. Ren Baqian corrected him. Will they be the ones selling the glass in the future? Tong Jingye asked as he smacked his lips. Yes, I sold the dealership. Ren Baqian nodded. There was nothing to hide about this. They are willing to pay such a high price for it, which means that they can earn more money, right? Tong Jingye asked again. Indeed. Ren Baqian continued to nod. Tong Jingye then understood and said disdainfully, I've always heard people talk about squandering, but I've seen it for myself today. Ren Baqian almost spat blood on his face. Tong Jingye was humbly asking for advice just now, but he turned hostile so quickly. Am I smarter or are you smarter? Ren Baqian asked with his eyes wide open. Tong Jingye put his hands on his hips and laughed. Don't you have any idea how smart you are to ask such a question? Pfft. Ren Baqian was so angry that he spat at Tong Jingye's face. Tong Jingye swayed his head and dodged it perfectly. He clicked his tongue and said, You are angry out of humiliation. Ren Baqian felt that if he had a beard, it would be standing up by now. Tong Jingye, this old man, really made people want to vomit blood. Even so, the fact that Ren Baqian had amassed 15 million taels of silver this time still shocked the officials. If it wasn't for the fact that Ren Baqian sold a chicken that could lay golden eggs, many of them would have asked him how to earn money. Shi Qing sat in the courtyard and laughed. Does he lack a chicken that can lay golden eggs? As for Tong Jingye, he was all smiles when he returned to his residence. Grandpa, I heard that you went to provoke Yague. Tong Lan asked with a smile during dinner. Tong Lan was now 14 years old, and her figure had become slender and elegant. People couldn't help but lament that this girl had grown up. Grandpa is speaking the truth. Tong Jingye stroked his long beard and laughed. Do you really think he sold it wrongly? Tong Lan continued asking. Tong Jingye rubbed her head. Does he look like a fool to you? Yes. Tong Lan nodded and said, If others treat him as a fool, then they are the real fools. That's right. Then what are you going to do? My classmate almost died of laughter when he heard about it. Then, he told me about it. Tong Lan pouted unhappily. Otherwise, I'm afraid he'll be in some trouble during this period. Who still dares to find trouble with him? It was good enough that he didn't cause trouble for others. His Majesty is biased, always biased towards him. Sigh, Your Majesty, you've changed. Tong Jingye looked unhappy at the mention of this matter. Why was he always the one getting beaten up every time he went to the brothel with Zhao Prince Consort? His Majesty wasn't like this before. Wasn't this a little too open and above board? Tong Jingye then said, No one dares to cause trouble for him, but there are still many people who want to ask him for advice on how to make money. This doesn't matter, but the Ministry of Works is still waiting for his so-called mother machine. It's not appropriate for him to be bothered by people all the time. He doesn't know that you are being kind. Tong Lan curled her lips and felt that Tong Jingye was doing a thankless job. As for the importance of the mother machine, she knew it. Yague often said that the mother machine was an industrial mother machine. With the mother machine, more sophisticated equipment could be manufactured, and with more sophisticated equipment, more sophisticated instruments and parts could be manufactured. In fact, Tong Lan's batch of students learned the most and had the best combination of learning and practice. The rest of the students played with what they had left. As a result, Rinpoche was most satisfied with the outlook and way of thinking of Tong Lan and the other students. You just said that anyone who thinks he's a fool is really a fool. Tong Jinya laughed heartily. If he knew that Rinpoche had scolded him after returning to the palace, he definitely wouldn't have laughed so happily. If it were someone else, Rinpoche might have thought about the reasons behind it. But Tong Jinya. In any case, after the auction ended, Rinpoche took this opportunity to earn a large sum of money that could be used to invest in the construction of the new palace. Many chambers of commerce and families in the Yun nation also took this opportunity to get acquainted with Rinpoche and get a hen that could lay golden eggs for 3 years. It could be said that both parties were happy. The scene that happened in front of the Tractor 4's shop that day also became a topic of discussion among a small number of people. Subsequently, it spread to the ears of many rich families and scholars. From this incident, it could be seen that the upper echelons of the Aboriginals were indeed different from before, and the core of this change was Xiao Prince Consort. Merchants preferred a peaceful and prosperous world, not a world of blood and fire. In troubled times, human lives were as cheap as dogs. No matter how rich they were, they couldn't guarantee the safety of their families. From the current point of view, the situation was still developing in a stable direction. If this continued, even if the Yun nation changed owners, they might still be able to continue living a wealthy life. In addition, another point was that after 2 trips on the official road from Lon City to the Yun nation, the official road paved with marble slabs wasn't pleasing to the eye. The width of the former was 4 times that of the latter. When one lifted the curtain and looked out, one could see everything at a glance. It was extremely spacious, and it was hard to believe that it was built by 100,000 people in 3 years. The smoothness of the cement road and the stone road couldn't be compared at all. This feeling was even more obvious when one was sitting in a carriage. It was said that the Aboriginals' carriages used a material called rubber, which was much more stable than their carriages. Unfortunately, it couldn't be bought at the moment. It was said that the road from Lon City to the Chin Nation was being built, and it was unknown whether the road to the Yun Nation would be built in the future. Rinpoche was sitting in the rearguard commandery with Hua in his arms. Remember, let the strong men assist the soldiers and maintain order. There are so many people here, and we can't let anything go wrong. If there are any problems, report them immediately, Rinpoche instructed the people below. Understood. Rinpoche nodded and dismissed the people. He knocked on the table and said, Lieutenant Hua Qinghua, let her in. A moment later, a woman in a leather coat with a long saber at her waist, braided hair, and a scorpion tattoo on her face strode in. She looked around as she walked and asked, Xiao Prince Consort, why did you call me here? Rinpoche sized her up. Previously, he was far away, and there were more people around, so he couldn't see her clearly. It had to be said that the corners of her eyes and eyebrows were fierce, and it was somewhat less attractive on a woman's face. However, this didn't matter to her. He liked her way of doing things. Are you interested in changing positions? Rinpoche asked with a smile on his face. What do you mean? Hua Qinghua widened her eyes and asked without any hesitation. Well, I think you do a good job. It's a pity to leave you in the winged cavalry. I'm not looking down on the winged cavalry, but I'm afraid that there will be fewer battles in the future. If a person like you is placed in another position, he or she will be able to play a greater role and better contribute to the construction of Dao's society. Hua Qinghua scratched her head and looked puzzled. Xiao Prince Consort, are you going to change my position? Simply put, that's it. Rinpoche nodded. Is there anyone who wants to fight? Is there a fight? Isn't it exciting? Hua Qinghua's eyes lit up. I've been bored out of my mind recently. Maybe there is. Rinpoche set a distant goal for her. Fight with Zidong Lai. Isn't it exciting? I can't beat him. Hua Qinghua said frankly. Ren Baqian laughed. What a straightforward character. Zi Donglai was the protector general of the Northeast and the Yun nation's god of death. Hua Qinghua didn't even mention whether she dared to or not and just said that she couldn't beat him. Hua Qinghua, who was in his arms, looked around. Seeing that Ren Baqian wasn't paying attention to her, she sneakily picked up an inkstone from the table and put it in her mouth. Gotcha. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 997. Ren Baqian sent Hua Qinghua off and stared at Hua, who was sitting on the table with a cheerful look on her face. He was pondering over a very important question with a serious look on his face. Should he send her to the clinic? Woo! Hua stretched out her chubby little hands toward Ren Baqian for a hug. Don't move. What did you do just now? Ren Baqian asked sternly. Looking at Ren Baqian's serious expression, Hua pouted and said, Woo! Woo! A cry that resounded through half of Lan City engulfed Ren Baqian. After a long time, the dizzy Ren Baqian carried Hua out of the rearguard commandery. At this time, there were only a few people left in the rearguard commandery who could still breathe. Those who could run had all run. Those who couldn't run had to rely on their bodies. Hua's face had been washed clean, and there was no blackness in her mouth. Ren Baqian felt that with Hua's strong physique, she didn't need to go to the clinic. She even ate a third of a solar cell the last time. On the way back to the palace, Hua looked at the shops and pedestrians on the left and right. She kept stretching out her hands and laughing. Unfortunately, Ren Baqian didn't dare to let her go. What if she bit someone? There was still a bite mark on Zhu Hua's chest. Don't ask Ren Baqian how he knew. Zhu Hua was about to go crazy. Zhu Hua was almost 20 years old and was considered a big girl. In addition, she had always been like a wild girl who liked to compete and be brave. Her body was getting hotter and hotter. In the middle of the night, she ran to Ren Baqian and vowed, I quit. Even if you fire me, I won't do it. However, when Ren Baqian increased her monthly salary from 100 taels to 200 taels, plus 4 days of rest every month and 3 bottles of the most important beef mince, Zhu Hua felt that she could continue working. After returning to the palace, Ren Baqian threw Hua to Zhu Hua and told her to take care of her before going to look for the Empress. That night, Zhu Hua ran in a panic and said, Oh no, the little princess has been poisoned. Ren Baqian and the Empress were shocked. In a flash, the Empress disappeared without a trace. Ren Baqian frowned and asked, What happened? I don't know. Zhu Hua, who had always been wild, was also a little flustered. When the little princess went to the toilet just now, the filth she expelled was all black. Ren Baqian's angry face suddenly froze. It was black. Black. Nonsense, he ate half of an inkstone during the day, how could it not be black? At this point in time, the Empress had already flipped out. After all, her biological daughter was poisoned in the palace, so it was natural for her to react violently. At this moment, Ren Baqian could already feel the aura coming from the palace beside him. It was as if a huge mountain was pressing down on the entire palace. Everyone in the palace looked in the direction of the aura in shock. The palace guards rushed to the scene. When Ren Baqian arrived, half the courtyard was already filled with people. The Empress stood in the middle of the hall and looked at the bucket in front of her. Her face was gloomy as if a thunderbolt was about to strike. Someone, go and inform the doctor to come over immediately. Others, tell me, why did my daughter encounter such a thing in this palace? Ren Baqian had just rushed out of the hall when he heard this voice. Immediately, he became anxious. This time, he had made a huge blunder. He hurriedly shouted in a deep voice, "That's right. Why would the princess eat an inkstone in the palace? Which idiot put the inkstone in a place where the princess can reach it?" The water empress, who was about to strike down with lightning, was stunned when she heard this voice. Her expression immediately turned strange. The aura on her body also began to dissipate. Everyone in the courtyard was at a loss. They couldn't help but look at their surroundings. What exactly happened? Everyone was still in a daze. "Aren't you going to investigate? Do you have to wait for Her Majesty to get angry?" Renbochin looked at everyone standing there like wooden blocks and scolded them in exasperation. Yes. Everyone dispersed with a blank look on their faces. What was an inkstone? And where exactly did the little princess eat it? What exactly was going on? Was there anyone who could explain? The guards in the palace were considered high-level intellectuals if they could read large characters. How could they possibly know something as high-end as an inkstone? Renbochin hurried back to the hall. The Empress had a strange look on her face. She was a little playful, a little angry, and a little glad. "Tell me, what happened?" The Empress's face turned gloomy when she saw Renbochin. It seemed like he knew what was going on. But he didn't tell her. Almost caused a storm. "Congratulations, Your Majesty." Not only did Hua display the greatest talent in martial arts in 10,000 years, but he also showed a strong interest in knowledge. Renbochin laughed. Stare. The Empress looked straight into his eyes and waited for him to say something. "If you want to be a scholar, you have to have some knowledge." Renbochin laughed dryly. Then she ate half of the inkstone. Renbochin spread his hands. The Empress was confused. Renbochin was speechless. Zhu Hua, who hurried over, shrank her neck. She suddenly felt a little cold, and the atmosphere in the hall was a little strange. After a while, the Empress left in a hurry. Zhao Prince Consort used some strength to pull himself up from the ground. Then, he pulled Hua off the wall. Wah! Another cry that awakened the entire palace and half of Lan City was heard. Although there were no trivial matters in the royal family, what happened in Dao's harem was indeed a trivial matter. There were only two things that were most important to Renbochin. One was to recruit 50,000 laborers from Tianjing Basin to build the new city. The daily necessities of these people weren't trivial matters, especially when it came to transporting them from Tianjing Basin to the new city. It was a journey of thousands of kilometers and tens of thousands of people. This was a test of the ability of Dao's officials. The other matter was the mother machine that the sword masters were making. It had to be said that these sword masters were indeed talented in this aspect. If they didn't have swords in their hands, they would be seen grabbing hair, pulling collars, spitting, and punching each other. When they held swords in their hands, they immediately became peerless sword immortals. A strand of hair in their hands could be cut into 16 pieces. After spending 2 years learning all kinds of knowledge, with their ability to absorb, they could at least reach the level of a master's degree. Coupled with their superb hands-on ability and exquisite control, they had become professional talents with superb hands-on ability that amazed even the experts. In particular, those flying swords that came at the command of the experts were so shocked that their jaws almost dropped. No matter how many times they saw it, they couldn't reduce the shock in their hearts. They felt that Darwin's and Newton's coffins couldn't hold on any longer. The existence of flying swords simply challenged their outlook on life, values, and worldview. Of course, they should have abandoned these things after coming to this world. It just so happened that the equipment in the laboratory was still relatively scarce, so someone proposed the concept of a mother machine in an attempt to make more sophisticated equipment. These sword masters also understood the importance of a mother machine from the knowledge that they had learned. The rest of the matter took its natural course. With a few Spirit Will Sword Masters as the main force and many Earth Will Sword Masters as assistants, it took them half a month to create the first milling machine with a processing accuracy of 0.1 mm. When Renbochin found out about this, they were already thinking about how to make a milling machine with an accuracy of 0.06 mm. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 998. Genius 1 second to remember website address, Chinese Apex, latest update. No advertisements. He had just returned from the hospital. Just now, he was still complaining to his wife that he had been through a lot of hardships recently. First, he had gotten injured while traveling. Then, due to bandaging and drinking, his minor injuries had turned into serious injuries. He had only recovered after a month of recuperation. Now, there were 2 bumps under the skin of his thighs. Then, his son had gotten the flu again. From the 30th until today, he had spent more than half of his time in the hospital. His son had just recovered, and his wife was lying down again. Pneumonia, fever 39 degrees Celsius. After waiting for a few hours, he sent his wife to the hospital again. Fortunately, there were much fewer patients in the emergency department than in the pediatrics department. If it was the pediatrics department, he reckoned that he would only be able to leave the hospital the next morning. Also, his mother-in-law had just completed the procedures today and would be undergoing surgery the next day. He did not know if his wife would recover the next day. In any case, there was not a single day of peace at the end of the year and the beginning of the year. He felt that there were all sorts of things happening. It was not to act pitiful, nor was it to apply for leave. In any case, he would write as much as he could and throw caution to the wind. He just wanted to complain. He had just bought a VR helmet at the end of last month. Could he have time to watch a short movie? The terrible ending of the 18th year and the beginning of the 19th year of The Toy Boy of the Empress's Family. Currently typing. Please wait for a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page again to get the latest update. Apex Chinese Full Text Update. Remember website. Chapter 999. Renbochin pushed aside some matters and took 2 days to go to the laboratory. He also brought along the little Princess Erhua. Normally, parents in the city would want to take their children to the suburbs. Although the palace wasn't small, it was still too small for this world. Renbochin also hoped that she could see more things. Just like ordinary parents, they had a lot in common when it came to treating their children. Erhua wasn't as excited and eager as she was when she first left the palace. Although the boundless plains and fields made people feel free, in the eyes of this little fellow, there was nothing new and interesting. Occasionally, when Renbochin wasn't paying attention, she would grab some strange things and stuff them into her mouth. For example, bugs on grass stalks, for example, a 3-eyed toad, for example, a butterfly the size of a palm that was flying, for example, a bug that looked like a beetle on a tree. His chubby little palm pressed up and grabbed, and with a flip of his hand, he threw it directly into his mouth. Her eyes narrowed. Renbochin could feel the happiness in her expression. This happiness lasted until they entered the mountain. This mountain was originally called Mount Neidu, and the meaning of the name was obvious. It was very simple and straightforward. Renbochin waved his hand and changed it to Mount Zhongshe, which was actually Mount End. After all, everything in this world would start from here. From the name, one could see Renbochin's expectations for the laboratory here. The laboratory was halfway up the mountain, and there were soldiers guarding the foot of the mountain. A cement road went straight to the mountainside, and at the top, the winged cavalry were the guards. Besides the lack of Cardinal Heaven experts, the security here was second only to that of the palace. Coupled with the few spirit sword masters in the laboratory, the security here wasn't much weaker than that of the palace except for the Empress. When Rinpoche arrived at the mountainside and got off his mount, Erhua cried out and jumped into the forest the moment he turned around. "Find her and bring her back," Rinpoche ordered the guards around him. Now that the murderers on the mountain had almost been eliminated, it was rare to even see a manual expert. With Erhua's skills, she naturally wouldn't be in any danger. However, as soon as he entered the laboratory, he heard a cry from afar. Rinpoche scuttled out of the courtyard. In less than a minute, he saw Zhu Hua returning with Erhua in her arms. Erhua's eyes were filled with tears. He was crying with snot and tears, and he kept spitting out saliva. "This is..." "She ate the stinky turtle." Zhu Hua had a gloating look on his face. "Who told her to bite his chest? Who wasn't a young girl?" Rinpoche, stinky turtle was a type of insect the size of 2 finger joints. When it encountered an enemy, it would release a strong irritating liquid. This kind of fighting method was very common, and there were many such species on Earth, such as the 9-fragrance bug, the stink bug. However, the bugs in this world were especially smelly, and the smell was especially disgusting. Of course, it was nothing compared to a skunk bomb. Even so, Two Flower had suffered quite a bit this time. Rinpoche felt that this was an opportunity to get rid of her habit of eating random things. He smiled and carried Honeysuckle over. A second later, he stuffed Honeysuckle back into Zhu Hua's arms. It was too smelly. After suffering such a big loss, Erhua finally behaved for a while. She curled up in Zhu Hua's arms and sobbed. The lingering smell wouldn't disappear for a while, and it was enough for her to remember. When Rinpoche arrived at the laboratory, he first looked at the simple milling machine. The gears, lead screw, and knife holder were all exposed. It was powered by hand, but it could be easily changed to electricity. There was also a row of various milling cutters at the side. This milling machine was mainly used to process screws, twist drills, and other parts with grooves. Although it was simple, it had an extraordinary significance. 0.3 millimeters. This was a level of precision that could only be achieved by an old craftsman who had been immersed in forging for decades. However, at this moment, only this machine was needed. Any apprentice could operate it, and the speed was several times faster than those old craftsmen. With this machine, it meant that the manufacturing of precision equipment in this world had moved from small workshops to industrial mass production. Well done. Rinpoche stroked the simple machine in front of him. He couldn't hide the happiness on his face, and he wasn't stingy with his praise. Thank you, Your Highness. The person who spoke was Ling Du, one of the spirit sword masters and one of the first 2 to come to Lan City. Don't thank me. I should be the one thanking you. Your names will be remembered in history. Rinpoche smiled. If possible, we can exchange this honor for something else. Ling Du said bluntly. What do you want? Rinpoche turned to look at him and the other spirit sword masters. These people were treasures, real treasures. They were even more valuable than those top experts. There were many experts in this world, but there weren't many such treasures. Brothel. The youngest, Du Mengyang, was interrupted before he could finish speaking. Cough, cough. A violent cough interrupted him. An old man glared at him and said, vulgar. The old man was called Jin Yong. He turned and smiled at Rinpoche. It would be best if there was a Zhang Tai. Rinpoche thought about the word Zhang Tai and realized that it seemed to be another name for a brothel like a brothel. This term existed on Earth as well. According to the records of the Han Dynasty, there was a street in ancient Chang and called Zhang Tai. There were many brothels on the street, and the term Zhang Tai originated from this street. It wasn't surprising that there was such a term in this world. However, Renbochin was still a little surprised that there was actually a term called zhangtai. He just didn't know if it meant what he thought it meant. Brothel? Renbochin asked. Jin Yong replied calmly, a high-end, grand, and classy brothel. It's not a place like a brothel. Children are ignorant. Renbochin was surprised. This requirement wasn't low. To build a brothel in such a remote place. To specifically serve them. As if reading Renbochin's mind, Jin Yong said bluntly, we want a prosperous world, not this desolate place. What's the difference between this and my previous life? Renbochin thought for a while and asked, do you want to get married? Jin Yong rolled his eyes and replied, not interested. Actually, I'm still interested. Du Mengyang muttered. What do you know? How can a domestic flower be better than a wildflower? Jin Yong turned his head and scolded. You have to have a domestic flower first. Du Mengyang was obviously unconvinced. Renbochin thought about it and agreed. All right, I agree. At most, he would move to a brothel from the Yun nation. Your Highness is very loyal. Jin Yong was overjoyed and gave a thumbs up. Renbochin smiled and changed the topic to the milling machine that they were currently making. How is it? Can you make a 0.1 mm precision milling machine? It will take some effort, and it will be scrapped if you're not careful. Jin Yong said frankly, however, it can still be made with some time. When I see a brothel, I will definitely let you see a 0.1 mm precision milling machine. That's not enough. A 0.1 mm precision milling machine can't meet my requirements, Renbochin said with a smile. Jin Yong furrowed his eyebrows, frowned, and thought for a moment before gritting his teeth and saying, 0.07 mm precision is the most I can achieve without relying on other tools. Renbochin laughed when he heard this. These people still had room to exploit. In fact, machines with a 0.01 mm precision could be found everywhere on Earth. They could only be considered street goods, and it was very easy for him to bring them over. However, technology would progress little by little. Otherwise, it would be a castle in the air. Being able to achieve this in such a short time in such a simple environment was enough to satisfy Renbochin. These people were really treasures. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1000. Renbochin came to the laboratory not only to look at the machine tools but also to obtain a thick stack of data. This included standard atmospheric pressure, gravity, elemental table, air composition, soil composition, and so on. This was the basis of the development of science and technology in this world. For these things, 3 experts went to the Yun nation under the protection of the winged cavalry warriors. Not to mention the novelty of what they saw and heard along the way, this data would at least allow Renbochin to modify some of the teaching materials at the academy. For example, the atmospheric pressure in this world was 1 times that of Earth. However, Renbochin had done experiments at the academy and found that the boiling point of water was about 106 degrees Celsius, which meant that Lon City was more than 1,000 meters above sea level. At the same time, the gravity in this world was slightly higher than that of Earth. These experts felt more tired when they first came to this world than on Earth. According to their observations and some speculations, the planet in this world was larger than Earth, rotated faster than Earth, and was further away from the star than from Earth to the Sun. As for the specific data, it would take a long time to come up with it. The air in this world was composed of only 72% nitrogen and 25% oxygen. There was one more rare gas than on Earth, which made up a total of 4%. The biggest difference between this world and Earth was that there was an important gas in the air that made up more than 5%. This gas was very active at high temperatures and could easily react with a variety of elements. Renbachyan stayed at Zongshishan for a night and approved 2 batches of experts' applications to expand the sampling area. The next day, he returned to Lawn City with the thick stack of data. With these people, he had a lot less to worry about. As expected, professional matters should be left to the professionals to handle. After returning to Lawn City, Renbachyan stopped for a while on Jingyang Street. There were 3 gates and 4 roads in Lawn City. The intersection of the 4 roads was in the middle, which was also the most prosperous area in the entire city. A little south of this intersection, there was a 3-story brick building that was much taller than the other 2-story buildings. The bricks were decorated with large pieces of white jade. White jade was still stone, but its color was similar to white jade. It was a mineral deposit that had been discovered during a recent mine exploration and was more valuable as a decoration than its original material. This small building was 6 storefronts wide, and with the white jade decorations, it looked quite luxurious. It could be said that in the eyes of most people, the most luxurious building in Lawn City was this newly built shop with the word, silver, hanging on its door. At this time, there were many people outside the bank. People entered and came out one after another, holding a few pieces of paper in their hands. Their expressions were slightly uneasy. "Boss, can this thing really be spent?" One of the men leaned on the shoulder of the other man and waved the piece of paper in his hand. "It should be possible, right?" The burly man who was being held down had a face full of doubt. "His Majesty wouldn't lie to us. I still owe the restaurant a tale of silver. I don't know if they'll accept this." The other man's face was also somewhat gloomy. These were all people from the Public Order Bureau. If they were like this, then there was no need to mention ordinary people. He was used to using silver and copper, so when he suddenly received this kind of new paper, he felt that it was unreliable. "Didn't you see the notice? This thing can be exchanged for silver and copper here," another burly man said from the side. "Nonsense, I want to see it, but the problem is that I don't understand it. They recognize me, but I don't recognize them. Isn't this superfluous? Wouldn't it be better to just give them silver?" someone muttered. Renbachyan watched quietly from afar. That's right, it was indeed superfluous at the moment. After all, these banknotes weren't recognized by the people outside. Regardless of whether they were used to buy things or do other things, they had to be exchanged for silver first. However, this was, after all, a beginning. When these people got used to using these banknotes to exchange for silver and copper, and when the people started to get used to it, these banknotes could be directly used for exchange in the market. Renbachyan had a series of plans to use these banknotes to promote them. His goal was to allow banknotes to be used in most places in Deo within 3 years. "This is Her Majesty, right?" Someone sitting on a horse said to the people around him while distinguishing the patterns on the banknotes. They were Bai Shurying, the head of the Public Order Bureau, and Tai Yen, the head of the Department of Supervision. Their salaries weren't even 100 taels of silver, and they were probably here to watch the show. They had changed the banknotes from the largest to the smallest denominations. "It must be. Her Majesty is actually drawn on this. Who is this? Zhao Prince Consort. Look at the sun. Zhao Prince Consort is beside Her Majesty's banknote. Her Majesty is beside Zhao Prince Consort's banknote. The two of them are even looking at each other. Why do I feel like I've been fed something? I'm suddenly in a bad mood." After the two of them finished speaking, they turned around and saw Renbachyan smiling brightly. "Zhao Prince Consort is here. You and Her Majesty. What did you say?" Tai Yen turned to look at Bai Shurying. Bai Shurying frowned, pondered, and suddenly realized something. "Like chewing wax. Is this how it is?" "It should be," Renbachyan said playfully. Her Majesty will definitely be happy to hear that. Of course. Bai Shiying laughed heartily. I've even studied a few books. They are all in the stomach of a dog, Ren Baqin cursed. The three of them exchanged some pleasantries and left in a hurry, saying that they were going to the brothel to take a look at something for their little babies. Ren Baqin turned around and returned to the palace. These banknotes were denominated in silver. The largest denomination was 100 taels of silver, which was equivalent to 100 taels of silver. Below that, there were 50 taels of silver, 20 taels of silver, 10 taels of silver, 5 taels of silver, 1 tael of silver. The lowest was up to 1 centimeter of silver, which was equivalent to 1.2 yuan. Embossed printing and watermarking were used to prevent counterfeiting. Cotton and 2 other plants were added to the banknotes and mixed in a certain proportion to make the banknotes harder. With these techniques, it would be difficult to imitate them for at least 20 years. In addition, there was a warning on the banknotes that said, counterfeiters will be punished with capital punishment. On the 100 taels of silver note was the portrait of the Empress. She was looking sideways at the only blank spot on the banknote. In the blank spot was his Mercury, which was looking at the Empress. The 50 taels of silver and 100 taels of silver were polar opposites. On the 20 taels of silver note was a map of Dao, including the current Yun nation. On the 10 taels of silver were the Aboriginals, the Jing tribe, and the people of the Yun nation. On the 5 taels of silver were the armies. On the 1 tael of silver was the train. The Empress was sitting in the palace and watching a TV series. She hadn't gotten tired of watching it for so many years. She sighed when she heard the whimpering sounds coming from outside. She was back after 2 days of peace. Your Majesty. Ren Baqin left Lu Hua outside. After entering the hall, he hugged the Empress and casually complained, when I came back just now, I saw the officers from the Public Order Bureau and the Inspection Bureau. According to them, we were like chewing wax. The Empress thought for a while before she understood what he meant. Her face turned cold as she said, they are itching for a beating again. They even dare to make up gossip about me. Ren Baqin agreed and said, I think so too. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1001. Brother, sister-in-law, you are back. Wanyan opened the door and laughed at Ren Baqin and the Empress. Although Ren Baqin rarely saw him nowadays, they had a good relationship. Ren Baqin felt that this was probably because he always beat him up when he was young. Yuqing, call me uncle. Ren Baqin patted Qi Yuqing's head and laughed. Hua looked at Ren Baqin, thought for a while, and pointed to herself. Father. The smile on Ren Baqin's face froze. Ren Baqin stretched out his claws, grabbed Hua's face, and twisted it. What do you want to call me? Hua looked reluctant. With tears in her eyes, she called out in a childish voice, Uncle. Ren Baqin laughed. Brother, why bother with a child? A child's words carry no harm. Ren Baqin smiled and shook his head. It took him half a year to correct Hua's belief that she should call him father. However, he didn't change her habit of letting others call her father. In fact, although Hua was only 1 year old, she was already 1 meters tall, and her intelligence was comparable to that of a 3 or 4-year-old child. However, Ren Baqin found that this child was extremely stubborn. It took him half a year to correct her belief that she should call herself father, and her habit of letting others call her father. At this time, Hua was wearing a set of white clothes that imitated the Empress's style, covered with indigo muslin, and tied her hair in a ponytail. She looked refreshing and delicate, and her face was lovable. This set of clothes was able to slightly conceal her sinewy muscles. However, she still looked a lot bigger than an ordinary child. A year had passed, but her muscles hadn't decreased at all. This made Renbochin feel a little sad. The sweet little jacket in his heart had now become a Gundam. When he entered the door, his parents were there, as well as Renwanyan's wife and son, a boy about 10 years old. He looked delicate and obedient, and his name was Renxia. This is brother. Renbochin pointed to the boy. Erhua stubbornly pointed to herself. Father. She quickly corrected herself under Renbochin's finger, brother. Renxia happily came over to look at this sudden addition of a younger sister. Go and play with Big Brother. You're not allowed to push Big Brother, bump into Big Brother, or hit Big Brother. Renbochin repeated the 3 donned ts again and put the little fellow aside. Let me show you something good. Renxia acted like an older brother and called Honeysuckle over to look at his treasure. It was a game console that projected itself in the air. Honeysuckle looked at the little person running in the air with a face full of curiosity. After thinking for a moment, he firmly opened his mouth, revealing his eerie white teeth, but he bit down on nothing, so he immediately felt wronged. Renxia was amused by Honeysuckle's reaction. That's fake. It's a projection. He even introduced his favorite console, the PS666, to Honeysuckle. Of course, he emphasized on games. Honeysuckle obviously didn't listen to those words. He stared at the game console with interest for a while, then poked it with his finger to make sure it was real. Then, he revealed his white teeth. Renbochin had just sat down for 3 minutes when he saw Renxia running over in a panic and complaining, "She ate my game console, did you eat it?" Renwanyan looked at him and found it funny. Then let her eat it. Obviously, there was a serious discrepancy between what he thought and the reality. Renbochin slapped his forehead and disappeared from the sofa. Honeysuckle was sitting on the floor and chewing happily. Chips, metal shells, and other fragments kept popping out of his mouth. All that was left on the floor were these scraps. The Empress was 1 step ahead of Renbochin. When Renbochin arrived, she had already picked up Honeysuckle and slapped his butt a few times. Renbochin thought for a while and decided to appease the Empress before letting Honeysuckle spit out those things. Fortunately, it was the game console that I bit and not Renxia. The Empress's hand paused for a moment, then she slapped him even harder. Meanwhile, Renwanyan's face changed color. For the rest of the day, Honeysuckle sat beside the Empress. However, it was as if there were nails under his butt and he couldn't sit steadily. His body swayed left and right, and his eyeballs kept rolling. Even if his butt wasn't swollen, she still couldn't sit steadily. Honeysuckle was astonishingly full of energy and curiosity. He was curious about everything around him almost all the time. The others looked at Honeysuckle in surprise. After all, a child who could eat a game console in a few mouthfuls was amazing enough. The family gathering ended just like that, and Honeysuckle left a deep impression on everyone. Compared to the scene of sweeping away everything they heard, this family gathering gave everyone a more direct understanding of this little fellow. After that auction, Renbochin sold 2 more batches of tractors, totaling 3,000 tractors. Among them, 1,000 were given to the Aboriginals. Similarly, after that auction, the Aboriginals' enthusiasm for tractors finally exploded. Although tractors weren't cost-effective in agriculture, they had irreplaceable value in long-distance transportation. Of course, the long-distance transportation company that Renbochin set up played an important role in this. This was also the prototype of logistics. The Jing tribe was responsible for lobbying merchants in the Yun Nation to transport goods to Lon City through the transportation company. This saved them the trouble of setting up their own caravans, and it also allowed merchants who weren't strong enough to transport goods between the 2 places, invigorating the market. Since Rinpoche applied many of the mature rules and regulations of the logistics company from the very beginning, the long-distance transportation company, which appeared to be quite formal from the beginning, gained the recognition of a large number of small and medium-sized merchants in a very short period of time, and a steady stream of transportation orders followed. Not only did they transport goods, but they also transported people. Although it wasn't very comfortable, comfort wasn't the most important thing for those small and medium-sized merchants. With a sufficient market, the transportation company would naturally develop and grow in a short period of time. Having a tractor was a ticket to enter the long-distance transportation company. It could be said that Rinpoche had put in a lot of effort for the Aboriginals. He had used all kinds of methods. However, he could also understand that these reckless and straightforward people took a long time to accept new things. After this new initiative was announced, at first, only the various families and a small number of Aboriginals participated with the mentality of trying it out. After the first batch of people saw the sweetness, more Aboriginal people finally became enthusiastic. In just a few months, this long-distance transportation company had set up a fleet of nearly 1,000 tractors to transport goods between the two places. Including the families and big merchants from the Yun Nation, there were thousands of tractors traveling on this national highway every day. What followed were all kinds of traffic accidents. For example, people used their feet to hold the tractor's nose firmly in place and swung it to hit people. Some people used the tractor to drift. Some people carried the tractor to forcibly overtake other cars. There were also two tractors traveling side by side and fighting while driving. The most amazing thing was that 4 people carried 2 tractors and kicked each other while running wildly. Due to the collision, the 2 tractors couldn't move, which resulted in such a scene. All these situations were an eye-opener for Rinpoche. It had to be said that every world had its own way of playing. After accepting the new concept of tractors, the Aboriginals also burst out with amazing creativity, and a large number of magical old drivers from another world emerged. The tractor, coupled with their strong individual strength, made them look like they were racing kart riders. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1002. There was an endless stream of tractors, carriages, and pedestrians on the official road from Lawn City to the Yun Nation. Ever since the construction of this road, it had brought abundant vitality to these 2 areas. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call this road the main artery of Dayo, the giant. At this time, a group of 100 cavalrymen was rushing on the wide road, passing by a tractor carrying a lot of goods from time to time. This new type of transportation had gradually replaced the previous ox carts and carriages. This trend was getting faster and faster. Although the cement road was flat, it required a lot of animal power. The people here didn't understand the role of animal power, but they understood that it was because the road was too hard. The horses needed to rest after a few trips on the cement road. Every 100 kilometers along this road, there was a so-called relay station where people could rest, eat, sell biodiesel, and inspect and repair tractors. This made everyone feel convenient and at ease. The sky was getting dark, and the 100 cavalrymen stopped in front of a relay station. The relay station was located at the side of the road. It had been expanded into an area of several thousand square meters, and there was a row of 2-story brick buildings. Just like the new buildings in Lawn City, they had a completely different style from the previous buildings. The walls were made of red bricks, and they were covered with plants that looked quite exquisite. The tempting aroma of food was coming from a small building near the edge. Stop, get off your mounts and rest. Following the leader's order, the cavalrymen stopped one after another, jumped off their mounts, and tied them to the animal pen at the side. The 100 jumping goats only took up 1/3 of the space. Everyone entered the relay station and saw a row of electric lights hanging above the lobby. Like the street lights in Lawn City, they didn't require grease or other combustibles, and there was no choking smoke. They were clean and bright. The hall was very big, and there were dozens of wooden tables. Most of them were occupied. The Aboriginal tractor drivers, who were dressed in animal skins, the Yun Nation merchants, who were dressed in silks, the solemn-looking guards, and the low-profile Jing tribe people, who were sitting in the corner, were all sitting in the hall. Occasionally, the sweet voices of girls could be heard. The entrance of the 100 cavalrymen attracted a lot of attention, but they looked away after seeing their attire. The words "Dukkha" were written on their clothes, and the saber at their waist was the standard long saber of the winged cavalry. It was 3 times longer and 1 times wider than the saber of the ordinary Aboriginal army. Renbachien did not know what new department this was. New departments often appeared in Deo, such as the Department of Commerce, the newly established Department of Transportation, and the Department of Price. Although they didn't know which department they were from, everyone could tell that these people were from the winged cavalry. When traveling outside, one's eyes had to be sharp. These merchants who traveled this road all year round knew this principle very well. The one in front was a woman with a scorpion tattoo on her cheek. Nearly 100 burly men were also brimming with murderous auras. When they looked at people, their gazes seemed to be filled with provocation and ridicule. The 100 people sat at 10 tables, ordered roasted meat, vegetable broth, roasted potatoes, and wine, and began to eat in silence. However, he also paid attention to his surroundings while eating. Soon, the few of them stopped eating and looked to the side. A man dressed in embroidered clothes walked towards them. "May I ask if this is Lieutenant Hua?" The man cupped his fists at the leading lady and smiled. "Who are you?" Hua Qinghua raised her head and glanced at him. "Last time at the bank, I was saved by military officer Hua. Unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to meet him after that. Since we've met by chance today, I wonder if I can invite Captain Hua to have a drink with everyone. This is just a small token of my appreciation. Are you done?" Hua Qinghua looked at the roasted meat in front of her without batting an eyelid. I'm done. You're delaying my meal." Hua Qinghua's meaning was obvious. "You're a hindrance, so get lost." The middle-aged man didn't look too surprised. Although he felt a little awkward, he still maintained his gentlemanly manner and cupped his fists at Hua Qinghua. "In that case, I shall take my leave. Thank you, military officer Hua, for the previous matter." Hua Qinghua didn't say anything and continued to serve the roasted meat in front of her. The middle-aged man returned to his seat and laughed self-deprecatingly. "You must have suffered a setback." The man sitting at the same table with him was a wealthy merchant of similar age. As expected, the middle-aged man replied. "Aboriginals are all rocks. The kind that can't be moved." The wealthy merchant laughed softly. The middle-aged man agreed with him. However, he was still a little concerned about the Imperial Inspector uniform that Hua Qinghua and the others were wearing. Previously, when Hua Qinghua and the others arrived, everyone heard the sound of hooves and knew that they were heading toward the Yun Nation. They didn't know what to do. This incident was just a small interlude. Hua Qinghua and the others rested at the relay station for a night before continuing their journey. 2 days later, everyone arrived at Pingdu. First, they obtained some information from the rearguard commandery, rested for a night, inquired about some matters, and then headed straight for the protectorate of Yun Nation. After some time, Hua Qinghua finally saw Zi Donglai. Zi Donglai was a handsome man who looked to be in his 30s. His face looked as if it had been carved by a knife or an axe. It was angular, and his eyes were full of spirit. If one were to say that Zi Donglai was the most handsome man of the Aboriginals, there wouldn't be many people who would object. Even Hua Qinghua was momentarily dazed when she saw Zi Donglai. Imperial Inspector. Never heard of it. Why are you here? Zi Donglai sat at the seat of honor and asked faintly. Hua Qinghua became serious and took out an imperial edict. The gist of it was that the imperial inspector was responsible for investigating the conflicts and contradictions between the Aboriginals and the Yun Nation people in the Yun Nation, as well as investigating the harassment of the civilians by the soldiers of the Protectorate of the Northeast. Zi Donglai's eyes flickered and turned a little colder. Is this the intention of Her Majesty or Zhao Prince Consort? Since it was personally written by Her Majesty, it naturally has her intention. Hua Qinghua flipped the imperial edict over and showed it to Zi Donglai. The Yun Nation is newly settled, and there are many revolts among the civilians, Zi Donglai said with a cold face. In fact, Zi Donglai always had a cold face. It's one thing to rebel, but it's another thing for the soldiers of the Protectorate of Yun Nation to harass the civilians. Hua Qinghua took out another piece of paper from her waist and said, on the 11th of September, Commandant Tai Fengbao beat up a local merchant, Li Jingwen, after drinking in a brothel, seriously injuring him. On the 19th of September, Commandant Qin Huya's soldiers collided with someone on the road and started a fight with the local people. Huang Chu, Shen Du, and 13 other people were seriously injured. On the 6th of October, Commandant Su Sanhua and his soldiers beat up 4 scholars, Yuan Qing, Lu Dong, and 2 others in a restaurant. After that, their names were left behind and had a bad influence. 11th of October, enough. You're well prepared. They are all my soldiers. What are you going to do about it, Imperial Inspector? Zi Donglai waved his hand and interrupted Hua Qinghua. In the past 3 months, there have been 13 cases of harassment of civilians in Pingdu alone. There are even more cases in the entire Yun Nation. According to Her Majesty's order, these people must be punished according to military law. Moreover, they must be punished in an eye-catching place in the city to serve as a warning to others. They should be punished according to military law. Even if it's an order from Her Majesty, I won't accept it. Zi Donglai stood up after finishing his sentence. All of you may leave. Protector Zi. Are you going to defy the order? Hua Qinghua moved in front of Zi Donglai in a flash. How dare you? The guards in the tent were furious. You dare to stop me? Zi Donglai looked at Hua Qinghua with a dangerous coldness in his eyes. Protector Zi, the order is from Her Majesty. I, the Imperial Inspector, have the duty to investigate such matters. Hua Qinghua blocked his way without backing down. If you defy the order, Her Majesty will definitely be furious. I, Zi Donglai, and the soldiers of the Protectorate have made great contributions to the Yun Nation. Even if I have some flaws, I can't be punished in public. I refuse to accept Her Majesty's order. You can go back and report to Her Majesty. If Her Majesty wants to punish me, I'm willing to accept it. Hua Qinghua saw that Zi Donglai had made up his mind and gritted her teeth. She had just arrived, but Protector Zi had already refused to accept the order. This job was indeed difficult. Just as she was feeling angry, she felt a strong force pushing her away. Zi Donglai waved his hand in the air, causing her to retreat several steps. By the time Hua Qinghua came back to her senses, Zi Donglai had already left the tent. Hua Qinghua quickly chased after him. Stop! Zi Donglai's guards stopped Hua Qinghua. I have Her Majesty's order, so I can move freely. Who can stop me? Hua Qinghua sneered and took out the order from her pocket. The guards' morale immediately stagnated. Zi Donglai glanced at her, snorted coldly, and left without bothering with her. However, he didn't expect Hua Qinghua to follow him blindly. Whether he was eating or sleeping, Hua Qinghua would definitely appear by his side and read out the Empress's orders from time to time. If it were someone else, Zi Donglai would have killed them with a slap. However, Hua Qinghua had the Empress's order. After a period of time, Zi Donglai was quite annoyed. He couldn't beat her up or chase her away, so he simply instructed the guards to curse at Hua Qinghua and force her to retreat. He didn't expect Hua Qinghua to curse so badly that the guards couldn't open their mouths. However, Zidonglai couldn't do as the imperial edict said and let the soldiers receive military law in the streets and be surrounded by the people of the Yun nation. This was the stubbornness of a general. No matter what they had done, they were still his soldiers. How could he allow them to be humiliated in front of others? The two sides continued to be in a deadlock. When Renbaqian received the news, he felt rather helpless. Hua Qinghua's dogskin plaster tactic was suggested by him. After all, Zidonglai was extremely famous and had made great contributions. Even the Empress wouldn't easily touch him. However, if these matters weren't dealt with, the people of the Yun nation would always be hostile to the Aboriginals. In order to absorb a nation as a part of Dao, a combination of strength and gentleness had to be used. Rewards and punishments had to be fair. Zidonglai had no choice but to make such a move. Now, he just had to wait and see how long Zidonglai could endure. Renbaqian put this aside and waited for Zidonglai's reaction. He still had too many things to do and couldn't put too much energy into this. A year had passed, and the two were still in a deadlock. Hua Qinghua moved directly to the protectorate and was like Zidonglai's shadow every day. Even Zidonglai's guards and the generals from the protectorate were used to her presence. Hua Qinghua never forgot her duties. Almost every day, she would read the Empress's orders to Zidonglai. At the same time, she would also get her subordinates to bring news of the harassment of the people by the protectorate soldiers. Perhaps it was due to her efforts, but such incidents seemed to have decreased in the past 6 months. 2 years had passed, and Renbaqian sometimes almost forgot about this matter. Today, he had just finished looking at the phone sample that had just been produced and asked about Hua Qinghua's current situation. He didn't expect Zidonglai to be able to hold on for so long, which made Renbaqian feel rather helpless. Your Highness, I just received news that Protector General Z is going to marry Hua Duke in 3 months. Renbaqian was confused. Renbaqian's expression suddenly became extremely interesting. He felt depressed and didn't know what to say. That feeling was as if he had been F***ed. Chapter 1003. Although it had been 2 years, only 1 year and 7 months had actually passed. Logically speaking, Renbaqian should be happy about Zidonglai's wedding. He didn't have much of a relationship with Zidonglai. However, the descendants of such experts wouldn't be too talented. For example, Hong Wu's granddaughter, Hong Xian, had officially broken through to the Cardinal Heaven level 2 months ago. A 28-year-old Cardinal Heaven expert was considered one of the most talented among the Aboriginals. Every talented newcomer would be the foundation for the future fight against the foreign races. Renbaqian had always regarded the foreign races as his goal, so he should be happy to know about Zidonglai's wedding. However, he felt like he had been F***ed. In his heart, he naturally felt like he was hitting a dog with a meat bun and it would never come back. He had carefully selected Hua Qinghua and sent her to the Yun nation. He had lobbied the Empress to set up the Bureau of Investigation, thought up a plan for her, and asked for the warrant from the Empress. However, Zidonglai had been holding back for less than 2 years and had eaten the meat bun. This made Renbaqian want to curse, but he didn't know how to say it. Give me all the information related to the Bureau of Investigation for the past 2 years. Renbaqian sighed softly. He took a stack of information back to the palace and spent 2 hours sorting out the situation over the past 1.5 years. Although the meat bun couldn't be returned, it wasn't without gains during this period. At the very least, the soldiers from the Protectorate of the Northeast harassed and beat up the people of the Yun nation by about 70%. This became more and more obvious in recent times. Whether it was because Zidonglai was annoyed by her pestering, or because the generals from the Protectorate of the Northeast were flirting with Zidonglai, there were still some effects. This credit still belonged to Hua Qinghua. Ren Baqian leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and pondered. Under the current situation, Hua Qinghua didn't need to be removed from her position, and it might be useful to keep her status as an inspector. Hua Qinghua wasn't willing to let Zi Donglai be her master and might even be able to suppress him. In any case, he still had the trump card of the rearguard commandery in his hands, and he could report the situation of the Yun Nation and the Bureau of Investigation at any time. Having made up his mind, Ren Baqian opened his eyes and saw that the Empress had unknowingly returned. She was sitting there with her legs crossed and a wine glass in her hand, gently swirling it. Did Her Majesty go to the garden? Ren Baqian laughed. She turned her head and said, "These days, the flowers in the garden aren't gorgeous. I heard that if two people are buried there, the flowers will bloom exceptionally brightly. Who provoked Your Majesty again?" Ren Baqian went over and hugged the Empress. Then, he took the wine cup from her hand and drank it in one gulp. "The Qin nation has sent an envoy," the Empress said faintly. And then, "I don't like people who are too ugly. For the Qin nation to send two people like this, I'm sure they're intentionally insulting me." The Empress immediately categorized the Qin nation as being disrespectful to her. Ren Baqian smiled. This was indeed the Empress's temperament. Other than her own people, she had always done as she pleased with outsiders. Even if it was Li Yuanzhu, she would be chased away without any hesitation. Not to mention the two envoys from the Qin state. "Do you want me to meet him?" "It's too late. Their heads are hanging at the top of the city wall now." The Empress supported her chin with one hand and played with the empty wine cup with the other. She put her finger into the cup and used the pad of her finger to rub the drops of liquid on the wall of the cup. "It's just that I haven't killed anyone in a long time, and it's not easy to find two corpses to bury in the garden. However, the two corpses have already been hung at the top of the city wall, and it doesn't seem appropriate to let someone pluck them and bury them in the garden." The Empress was conflicted about whether to bury the two corpses in the garden. Ren Baqian thought about it and advised, "Erhua likes to pick up random things to eat." The Empress finally gave up the idea of burying the two corpses in the garden after hearing this. "The flowers in the garden aren't blooming well. Just fertilize them," Ren Baqian added. The Empress, who had just given up on burying the corpses in the garden, immediately changed her mind and ordered, "Someone, take down the two corpses from the top of the city wall and bury them in the garden." Ren Baqian took out another wine cup, poured himself some wine, and said to the Empress, "Protector General Z is getting married in 3 months." The Empress was stunned. "Why didn't I know?" "It has just been decided and will be reported to Your Majesty in another 2 days. Zi Donglai has worked hard and performed a great service. I will take this opportunity to give him a big gift to show his honor. I need to prepare a gift as well." Ren Baqian laughed. He was planning to give Zi Donglai 100 adult magazines, a projector, and 10 action blockbusters. He wondered if Zi Donglai could have a few more children. He always had a great plan in mind that was as great as the human restoration plan, the human reproduction plan. "Where's Erhua?" Ren Baqian suddenly remembered that he had been back for more than 2 hours, but he didn't seem to hear Erhua shouting. For this energetic girl, this was rare. "I didn't see her either," the Empress said faintly. Ren Baqian called the guards to look for her, and Zhu Hua rushed over shortly after. She was hiccuping all the way, and her face was flushed. "Your Majesty, the little princess is missing. What did you do?" The Empress looked at her coldly. Ren Baqian smelled a faint sweet scent in the air after she came in. It was very familiar. It was the smell of the golden ring honey. Ever since he tasted it in the 60,000 mountains, Shiwanya would send a few jars as tribute every year. Consuming this honey was similar to taking Diyu, and it could make one feel like they were on cloud 9 and hallucinate. Did Erhua give you the honey? Ren Baqian asked. Yes. It was quite delicious, and then I had a dream. Zhu Hua scratched her head. She obviously hadn't recovered from the fact that she was knocked down by Erhua. Ren Baqian rubbed his eyebrows. She was actually knocked down by a child who wasn't even 3 years old. With Zhu Hua's intelligence, there was no value in saving her. Everyone, search. We must find Yu Qing. The Empress ordered with a sullen face. Ren Baqian got up, put his hands behind his back, and paced a few steps on the ground. Did Erhua eat the honey? Ren Baqian looked up and asked. Zhu Hua thought deeply and then looked at Ren Baqian blankly. Obviously, she didn't pay attention to this question at all. Ren Baqian sighed. Asking her was indeed a waste of time. He thought about it carefully. Although Erhua wasn't even 3 years old, her intelligence was equivalent to that of a 7 or 8-year-old child. She must have made preparations to knock Zhu Hua down. Since Erhua wasn't found, she probably didn't eat the golden ring honey. She definitely didn't go through all this trouble just to play in the palace. That lass might have run out of the house. As for how she ran out, he would only know after he caught her. Your Majesty, let's go out of the palace and have someone guard the city gates while you're at it. Search the city, Ren Baqian said to the Empress. He wasn't too worried about Erhua's safety. One had to know that Erhua was at the advanced level of Kismet Heaven. Although she had no combat experience, she wasn't someone that ordinary people could bully. Moreover, with her strength, those who could defeat her would definitely know her identity. He wasn't worried about her safety. However, today, Erhua would probably have to face a mixed double. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1004. 4 hours ago. Below the Dayo Palace, there were many underground tunnels that looked like a spider's web. At this moment, a small figure was walking in the tunnels with her body bent. Even though it was pitch black, she didn't bump into the walls even once. Her long hair was tied into a ponytail. Her hair was originally 4 meters long, but after being accidentally tangled in a certain area, she finally endured the pain and cut it into ankle-length, short hair. Honeysuckle's eyes seemed to emit some kind of light in the darkness. From time to time, she would identify the direction at the intersection, or reach out to grab a bug from the soil at the side and throw it into her mouth. She would also listen to the sounds above her head and push away the soil above her to identify her position. After spending half an hour, Honeysuckle realized that there was no way forward. There was a huge rock blocking her way, and there was light coming from the edge of the rock. Wow! Honeysuckle cheered. She went forward and pushed the rock with her meaty little palm, creating a gap. Honeysuckle squeezed out of the gap and realized that this place was completely different from the places she had seen before. It was a courtyard surrounded by stone walls. There was a river, a rock garden, and many ice blocks piled there. A white bear was lying comfortably on top of the ice cubes. The moment it saw Honeysuckle, the bear raised its head, let out a roar, and revealed a mouth full of sharp teeth. Honeysuckle looked curiously at the white animal in front of her. In her memory, her father seemed to have brought her to see it before. Honeysuckle curiously moved closer and wanted to touch it. In her past experience, the furry things she had touched included the Roaring Emperor, Tian Tian, Gun Gun, and the Golden Retriever. All of them allowed her to pinch them. However, the white bear in front of her was obviously different from the one she had seen before. The tasty little fellow in front of it seemed to remind it of its days in the wild. It stood on its hind legs and let out a warning roar at Honeysuckle. Seeing that Honeysuckle approached it fearlessly and tried to seize its territory, the enraged white bear raised its huge paw and swung it at the little fellow. Honeysuckle, who had encountered such a situation for the first time, was at a loss. Her small figure in front of the huge white bear felt like she was facing a giant in a fairy tale. She allowed the huge bear's paw to reach her side before she hurriedly threw a punch as if she had just woken up from a dream. Crack! The front limbs of the white bear were twisted into strange shapes, and the white bear let out a mournful roar. The fear of being slapped by a woman in red all those years ago resurfaced in his mind. The white bear shuddered and gave up its precious land, the ice mountain, and curled its body into a ball. Honeysuckle, who had just been startled, was a little annoyed. Looking at the white bear that had curled up into a ball, he wanted to bully it, but he couldn't bear to do so. He thought about how he wouldn't be out for too long this time, and how excited he was about the outside world, so he suppressed the thought of bullying the bear. With a tap of his toes, he jumped over the wall. He wandered aimlessly around the beast park. He couldn't tell where he was going and had to hide whenever he saw someone. A few children were playing not far away. One of the children was facing the punches and kicks of the other children. In just a few moves, he had beaten the other children to the ground, causing their heads to bleed. The adults in the distance did not seem to care. They only laughed when they saw this and praised the strongest child. Tai Tu, you're the strongest among these kids. You might even become a high-ranking official in the future. Honeysuckle curled his lips in the dark. He was much stronger than him. He only needed one hand, no, one little finger to press him to the ground. However, his father and mother had never praised him like this before. This simple praise actually made Honeysuckle feel a little envious. The small figure first jumped onto a house. From here, he could see the main gate. After identifying the direction, he lightly jumped down again. Only half of his hair fell. Honeysuckle's hair was unexpectedly caught by something. He only fell about a meter high before he was suspended in the air. Although no one saw such a delicate little person hanging there, Honeysuckle, who was suspended in the air, looked at the top of his head and then at the bottom of his feet. His mouth twitched and he almost cried. Fortunately, he remembered that he was sneaking out of the palace, so he forcefully held back his tears. He grabbed his hair alternately with both hands and climbed up just like that. The roof of the beast park was made of wood and straw. Honeysuckle's hair was caught by a piece of wood. After discovering the culprit, Honeysuckle pouted and angrily broke the wood to free his hair. Crack! Who's there? Honeysuckle was startled when he heard the shout from below. He quickly dashed in the direction he was looking for previously. The people below only saw a small figure disappear in a flash. They were immediately startled and shouted loudly, immediately attracting the attention of others. However, he didn't even see the figure clearly. He only saw a shadow and couldn't tell who it was. He only remembered that the person seemed to be very small. However, no one expected that it was the little princess who had sneaked out of the palace. After discussing it, they reported it to the chief and then to their superiors. At this time, Honeysuckle had already disappeared. She saw the palace when she went out of the door. Then, she knew which direction to go. After all, her father had brought her out of the palace more than once or twice. She more or less remembered the way. After avoiding the square in front of the palace, Honeysuckle immediately cheered when she arrived at Jingyang Street. Wow! She had finally sneaked out. Looking at the surging crowd in front of her, Honeysuckle felt excited from the bottom of her heart. Although she had seen it before, it was in her father's arms every time. She had never seen it so clearly and so close to her. The cheerful Honeysuckle immediately pounced into the surging crowd like a husky that had escaped its reins. After walking for a short distance, Honeysuckle's eyes narrowed. There was a fragrance. What a fragrant smell! Following the direction of the fragrance, she could smell that it was coming from a small building. If she could read, she would have recognized the 3 words Shanhui House on the small building. Although Honeysuckle was illiterate on her first trip out, she remembered that she had smelled the fragrance from this house when she was in her father's arms. Squatting on the opposite side, she saw a few youths walk in with their heads held high. Not long after, a few more youths walked out with their heads held high. Honeysuckle immediately knew what was going on. Mimicking them, Honeysuckle walked through the crowd with her head held high. However, when she saw a bunch of tables and people sitting around them, Honeysuckle was dumbfounded. What should she do next? "Girl, what do you want to eat?" The one who spoke was a burly and fierce-looking waiter. The scar on his face twitched as he spoke. In other places, he would definitely be a character that would stop children from crying at night. At this moment, he was also sizing up the young girl who looked to be around 7 or 8 years old. She wore a white silk dress on the inside and a blue muslin dress on the outside. This kind of dress was not something that ordinary people could afford. Only the young ladies in Shanhui House could afford to wear it. Her hair was tied into a single ponytail that reached the back of her ankles, and her small face was extremely exquisite. Needless to say, she was the son of some big shot in the imperial court. An ordinary family would not be able to raise such a child. From the blank look on her face, it was obvious that she rarely went out. "Miss, please take a seat first. What would you like to eat?" The burly man tried his best to make himself look pleasant. Honeysuckle looked around blankly and thought for a moment. The most delicious. Spiced lamb leg, braised lamb trotters, medium well-roasted beef, and wild vegetable lamb stew. These are all the best. These are all recipes from the palace. The burly man said in a low, muffled voice. The palace? Honeysuckle pondered. Was the palace her home? Honeysuckle was a little uncertain. After thinking for a moment, Honeysuckle decided to eat first. "I want all of them." "All right," the burly man said loudly. Most aboriginals were big eaters. The more powerful they were, the more food they could eat. Even though the dishes here were served in bowls, it was not unusual for a little girl to order a table full of dishes. That girl from Minister Tong's family was only half full after eating a table full of dishes. Honeysuckle, on the other hand, had a face full of anticipation as she waited for the other party to cook for her. Eating in the same house with so many strangers was really too novel. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1005. Have you heard? It's said that a truck has just been invented that can run several times faster than a tractor. What truck? Have you heard of steam trains? That thing's rails are about to reach Lawn City. Lu San, didn't your second brother get arrested for stealing the rails? Is he still mining now? Pfft. He snatched the rails and couldn't beat them. The person called Lu San's expression changed instantly as he spat on the ground and corrected him. The Aboriginals despise theft the most, and even commoners rarely stole things. On the other hand, stealing wasn't a big deal. 2 years ago, the price of iron was even more expensive than it was now. Lu San's second brother must have lost his mind and actually tried to snatch the rails with 2 scoundrel friends. In the end, he was overturned and was still mining in the mines. Looking at the time, it would be another year before he could be released. This matter was considered a great humiliation for his family. It wasn't because he tried to snatch the rails, but because he was overturned by the railway patrol team. One had to know that the Lu family was considered a respectable family, yet their son was so disappointing that he had been ridiculed for the past 2 years. The people around them heard the conversation at the table and burst into laughter. The second floor of Shanghai restaurant was occupied by the children of the rich and powerful. The guests on the first floor were of lower status, but they were all officials in their families. Ordinary people wouldn't come here to eat at all. Even the merchants from the Yun nation wouldn't come here. Someone noticed Honeysuckle sitting there and asked with a smile, "Have you seen that child before?" He didn't mean any harm. He was just curious that she was sitting there alone despite her exquisite appearance and attire. "I haven't seen her before. I don't know which family she came from." Someone else glanced at her. "She's pretty. In a few years, she'll probably be the one asking for her hand in marriage." The person who spoke was in his 20s, 20 years younger than Honeysuckle. He was also joking with the gaze of an elder looking at a junior. Ordinary people won't be able to get close to her. The Aboriginals were straightforward, but they weren't blind, especially the children of the officials. Putting everything else aside, ordinary people wouldn't be able to see anything special about the muslin robe he was wearing. However, looking at its breadth and fineness, it seemed to be an imitation of crystal silk. A bolt of it cost several hundred taels of silver. Even an ordinary official wouldn't be able to afford it, let alone a child. Everyone just chatted for a while and didn't take it to heart. Honeysuckle didn't care that he was being talked about. His face fell when he saw the dishes on the table. "You ate this every day in the palace, and you still want to eat this after coming out?" Another table. Honeysuckle slammed the table and pouted. "I don't want to eat this." "Change another table." The waiter from before took a look and immediately removed the items on the table without any hesitation. "This is our restaurant's most famous dish. If you don't like it, what else do you want to eat?" Erhua rolled his eyes and looked around, then pointed at a table and said, "I want those from them." The waiter immediately reported the menu. Honeysuckle slammed the table and yelled, "I want a drink." Hearing this, the surrounding people immediately burst into laughter. "Little girl, how much can you drink?" Someone laughed and shouted. Honeysuckle knew that everyone was calling him, but he didn't know what they were laughing about. When he heard the question, he immediately raised a finger. "A bowl or a jar?" someone asked with a smile. It wasn't a big deal for Aboriginal children to drink a little wine. However, seeing such a cute little girl sitting at the table and asking for wine like a little adult was quite amusing. "I can drink as much as I want," Honeysuckle said in her cute voice. Pfft. Hearing this, everyone immediately burst into laughter. "Little girl, you're bragging, right? If you don't believe me, I'll show you. Give me wine." Honeysuckle was immediately unhappy when she heard someone questioning her. "Ah, little girl, I'll treat you to a drink. Drink it first before we talk about anything else." Someone at the table next to her handed over half a jar of wine. It was the kind that contained 5 caddies of wine. Half a jar wasn't a small amount. Honeysuckle looked at the huge jar and was immediately dumbfounded. In the palace, she always drank the Empress's wine in secret, and they were all glass bottles. How was she going to drink such a big jar? Seeing her dumbfounded expression, everyone laughed again. Honeysuckle turned her head to see how the others drank. Coincidentally, she saw someone pouring wine from a jar and understood. She jumped onto a stool and poured herself a bowl of wine from the jar. Then, she raised the bowl and drank it in one gulp. "Good. Little girl, you're straightforward." Everyone cheered again. Honeysuckle frowned. It wasn't as good as the ones she drank in secret. However, she quickly cheered up again. No one was here to control her, and she wouldn't be scolded by the Empress and her father. She poured another bowl and drank it in one gulp. Seeing that she wanted to drink again, someone said, "Drink slowly, there's no rush." Honeysuckle wrinkled her nose. They had just said that she was bragging. She ignored them. Seeing that she drank another cup, everyone immediately cheered. It was rare for something interesting to happen in Shanhui House. Little girl, your face isn't even red. You can really drink. I wonder who taught you. Come, let's drink. A burly man laughed heartily and came over, clinking his bowl with honeysuckles. Seeing this, Honeysuckle became even more excited. Seeing that she really wasn't drunk at all, everyone took advantage of their enthusiasm and clinked glasses with her. Although Honeysuckle was surrounded by people every day in the palace, it was different here. Although the people here were a little rough, their enthusiasm and hearty laughter ignited something in her heart. Furthermore, she seemed to sense an unfamiliar emotion from these people's words, approval. In the palace, the Empress and her father treated her like a child. The people here were different. After Honeysuckle drank half the jar of wine, someone brought another jar of wine and invited her to drink. Shanhui House became even more lively. Everyone also began to see something different. It was true that Aboriginal children could drink a little, but this child had drunk so much without any reaction. This meant that her strength was far beyond that of an ordinary person. At the very least, she wasn't at the four-way heaven level. That meant that she was at the Kismet heaven level. To be able to reach the Kismet heaven stage at such a young age, only a few geniuses could compare to him, right? For example, Shurgan from the Great Elder's family and Tong Lan from Minister Tong's family. No one knew which family this girl belonged to, but she was actually so powerful. However, everyone was relieved. Since she was at the Kismet heaven level, they didn't have to worry about her drinking. With this little girl around, Shanhui House was especially lively today. Even the second floor was affected by the people downstairs. Someone hurried downstairs and saw a fair and delicate child standing on a stool with one foot on the table and the other on it. She was drinking bowl after bowl of wine. Many regulars of Shanhui House were cheering at the side, and every time, someone would drink with her. In just a short while, there was a pile of wine jars on the floor. Lu San, if you keep drinking, you'll lose all of your food money for this month. I can't lose to such a little girl. That would be embarrassing, the person called Lu San said fiercely. In fact, he had already lost a jar of wine to Honeysuckle, but he stubbornly refused to stop. The rich and powerful children who had come down to investigate went up and told them about this matter. Everyone else became curious and came down to see this little girl who could drink so much. Which family is she from? Do you know? I've never seen her before. Have you seen her before? No. This little girl is interesting. I'll go up and drink with her. So many of you are taking turns to fight a little girl. Aren't you embarrassed? This girl is interesting. Look at her. She drank so much, but she's completely fine. I heard she just said that she could keep drinking. I want to see what she's talking about. At this moment, Honeysuckle was very happy. She had never felt so carefree in her life. In her eyes, everyone here was a good person. She really hoped that they would come to the palace to play with her. She didn't refuse anyone. Even if no one touched her bowl, she would still drink. The sound of bowls clinking against bowls was endless. Even the passers-by outside could hear the loud cheers and toasts coming from Shanhui House. There was even a burly man who took off his clothes and jumped onto the table to sing a wild hunting song. With the first, there was a second. The rough singing quickly spread from the house to the outside. In the crowd, Honeysuckle copied the others. She held a bowl of wine in one hand and slammed the table with the other, shouting and laughing loudly. Chapter 1006. Renbaqian and the Empress stood on the roof. Below them was Jingyang Street, which was a few meters wide, and across the road was the noisy Shanhui restaurant. Unlike before, there was almost no one on the second floor of Shanghai restaurant. Instead, the first floor was bustling with noise. Cheers and laughter could be heard from afar. The Empress moved her ears and caught a childish voice in the wind. "Bring her out," the Empress said with a sullen face. Renbachien looked at the crowded restaurant that was in full swing and fell into deep thought. Hua is drinking in there, and as his father, I'm being squeezed out. It's not good, right? It's too embarrassing, Renbachien said seriously. Almost no one was below the Kismet heaven level in the group. If he didn't reveal his name, he probably wouldn't be able to squeeze in. Revealing his name just to squeeze in and drag Hua out. This momentum was too weak. The Empress looked at him resentfully and said, "I told you to focus on your cultivation, and now you know how to be embarrassed." "I'm too busy. It's good enough that I can maintain revisualization every day." Renbachien wasn't trying to shirk his responsibilities, but he was really too busy. Ever since his wedding with the Empress, he hadn't been idle at all. There were too many things in his mind. There were too many things that needed to be developed in this world, and his mind was constantly thinking about them. How could he not race against time to develop to the level of technology that had been developed on Earth for 200 to 300 years in just a few decades? The Empress knew that he was busy, so she didn't say anything else and moved to the entrance of Shanghai restaurant. Before anyone could react, his surging aura smashed towards the people in the building like a tsunami. Immediately, the people who were still laughing were scattered all over the place. The Empress saw Hua, who was standing in the middle with one foot on a stool and the other on a table. His sleeves were rolled up, and he was holding a bowl of wine in one hand and a jar of wine in the other. At this moment, Hua was in a state of extreme shock and was completely dumbfounded. In the midst of the merriment, she had forgotten that she had snuck out. When she saw the Empress now, she was naturally shocked. Then, she stuttered, "Mother. Mother." The Empress took a step forward and arrived at her side. She lifted her by the collar, took another step forward, and was already outside the door. In a few flashes, she had returned to the palace. After a moment of extreme shock, the people in Shanghai House finally burst out, "His Majesty came just now. It's actually the little princess. We were drinking with the little princess just now. The little princess is not even 3 years old yet, right?" Only then did everyone realize that the little girl who had been drinking just now was actually the little princess. One could imagine the shock in their hearts. Renbachien stood at the door and coughed softly. He was also puzzled. He often brought honeysuckle out, but no one recognized her. Zhao Prince Consort. Everyone turned to greet him. In the past, everyone looked down on Renbachien. However, with the rapid changes in Dayo over the past 2 years, everyone only had respect for him. It wasn't just in Lan City, but also in the Yun Nation, the Qin Nation, and Great Xia. But this time, it wasn't because of Qi Zixiao's gigolo. If the Empress was said to be one of the most talented women in the world, then Renbachien could be said to be one of the smartest people in the world. The various changes in Dayo and all kinds of novel but useful things had all been verified. It could be said that in just a few years, Renbachien had become famous all over the world. All of this couldn't be separated from the propaganda of the merchants of the Yun Nation. The auction of tractors and glass dealerships raked in 15 million taels of silver. Later, tractors with 30, 40, and 50 horsepower were introduced one after another, and a variety of technologies were introduced. This included the production of all kinds of paper and paper shells, the production techniques of toothbrushes, toothpaste, soap, and other items, as well as the production methods of new distilled liquor, the production methods of candy, and the new textile technology. All of these were thrown out by him in one fell swoop. There was no other way as there was a shortage of people. Now that he couldn't even recruit workers, he could only abandon these industries and transfer the workers to more important industries. Of course, he also had plans to expand the market and share the profits with the other ministers. After all, everything was monopolized by the royal family, and it was too unsightly to enjoy such a good life. He directly threw these technologies to the ministers in the court. How could these ministers understand these things? Although they knew that they were good stuff, how many people could they have under them? At this time, Renbochin gave them another idea. Join forces with the merchants of the Yun nation. It was said to be an alliance. They would provide the technology, and the merchants of the Yun nation would provide the money and labor. The profits would be split 70 to 30. Although the merchants of the Yun nation could only get 30%, they could use this opportunity to gain the backing of the big shots in the court, which was exactly what they wanted. After abandoning these industries that didn't have much technical content, Renbochin finally had more manpower. The big shots in the court were very grateful to Renbochin as they could earn a large sum of money just by sitting at home. As for the people of the Yun nation, not only did they get new technology, but they also found a big backer. It could be said that everyone was happy. The most important point was that this method directly narrowed the distance between the Yun nation and the Aboriginals. The big merchants and families of the Yun nation were entangled with the Aboriginals, so both sides were naturally much closer. The attitude of the upper class also affected the ordinary people of the lower class. As a result, the Yun nation was much more stable. If anyone wanted to rebel, these merchants who were involved would be the first to tell on them. Of course, it wasn't that there weren't any disadvantages. It could be said that Renbochin directly exposed the collusion between the officials and the merchants in Deo, which was still justifiable. He had directly planted a flower of darkness on this plain and unadorned land. However, this was also done after weighing all aspects. After the people were enlightened, he would rectify this situation. Moreover, the rearguard commandery would always keep an eye on those merchants. When a bad sign appeared, he would make a move on them, killing the chicken to warn the monkey. The others didn't know what he was planning. Even if they knew a little, they wouldn't be able to guess everything. However, the benefits were real, and everyone could see them. One could imagine how the people of the Yun nation felt about this Shao prince consort. Thanks to their publicity, Renbochin was now really famous in the world. In turn, it actually affected the perception of many people in Lon City. Even outsiders were so respectful of him, not to mention that he had already done so many great things and brought about so many changes. As long as these people weren't pebbles, they would naturally change as well. As a result, many of the officials in Shanhui House were very respectful when they saw Renbochin. It was completely different from a few years ago. Renbochin didn't care about this change in attitude and didn't feel particularly good about it. On the one hand, he only had one person in his heart and didn't care about others. After all, he was already a few decades old. According to the age on Earth, he was now more than 50 years old. 10 years in Deo was 30 years on Earth, and he was 55 years old. According to the lifespan on Earth, it could be said that he had one foot in the grave and didn't care so much about other people's opinions. On the other hand, he was used to this attitude. Of course, who would dare to believe that he was 55 years old when he returned to Earth with his burly waist and ferocious face? 35 was more like it. Ren Wanyan didn't dare to walk with Renbochin now. No matter how one looked at it, Renbochin looked 20 years younger. Time hardly left any traces on his face. His hair and beard, which were easily eroded by time, didn't even leave a trace. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second, Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1007. When Renbochin entered Shanhui House, everyone subconsciously made way for him. "That was Yu Qing just now," Renbochin said bluntly. It was rare that he didn't call her Hua. Even without him saying it, everyone knew that it was the little princess. Renbochin smiled at everyone and said, "This child has been in the palace for a long time and always wants to see the outside world. She sneaked out today." Everyone thought of this as well. When they saw her, they knew that she was a child who sneaked out from a wealthy family. She didn't understand anything in this world and often had a blank expression on her face. She looked adorable and made people want to pinch her. Those who had this thought were glad that they didn't pinch her. They regretted it after thinking about it. If only they had pinched her, they would have something to brag about in the future. I also pinched the face of the current princess. After more than 100 years, it would become, I also pinched the face of the current empress. Thinking about it, it would be so cool to say it. Those people regretted it even more when they thought about it. Seeing that all of you like her, I'm very happy as a father. After all, she is my daughter. Renbochin laughed. Everyone laughed as well. However, the next time you see her, you still have to report to the palace early. You know the importance of her identity, Renbochin added. Don't worry, Xiao Prince Consort. If anyone wants to hurt the little princess, they have to do it over our dead bodies first, someone immediately said. That's right. Never let anyone hurt the little princess. Everyone agreed. It's not just because of this. Her Majesty will also be worried if she finds out that she sneaked out of the palace, Renbochin continued. In fact, he wasn't very worried about Erhua's safety in Lan City. In any case, she was their child. Understood. Hearing that Her Majesty was mentioned, everyone looked solemn and said, if you see the little princess sneaking out again, you must report to the palace. Renbochin nodded, picked up the wine jar and bowl that Qi Yuqing had drunk from, and poured himself a cup. Today is a good day, and I'll drink with all of you. After saying that, he downed the cup. When the wine entered his stomach, Renbochin understood that it was about 23 to 24 degrees. Following which, Renbochin smiled at everyone and said, today's wine is on my daughter. I won't be paying for it. Everyone immediately scratched their heads and laughed. Xiao Prince Consort, what are you talking about? Renbochin nodded at everyone before leaving. He was really happy, which was why he said so much. As for the reason, it was simple. It was obvious that these people liked two flowers very much. This is the joy of being a father. These people were the descendants of officials, and in the future, they would also become officials in the imperial court. This scene made him feel that when Erhua grew up, he could also become an emperor who was as prestigious as the Empress and loved by the officials and people. When he came here, he was prepared for a mixed doubles match. However, after seeing the scene in Shanhui House, the anger in Renbochin's heart disappeared without a trace, and he changed his mind. Even though he had changed his mind, the Empress hadn't. Renbochin was still at the palace gate when he heard a cry coming from inside. Doubtlessly, Honeysuckle was beaten up again. Upon entering the palace, he saw the palace guard standing there obediently, not even daring to breathe loudly. The fury of the Empress made them feel pressured. Renbochin smiled and paced around the palace slowly. He wasn't in a hurry to go back and see his daughter get beaten up. After a while, when Erhua's crying and laughter stopped, Renbochin went back. He saw the Empress sitting there with a cold expression. He couldn't see any anger, but it was still very cold. Erhua was sitting on a small stool with a small table in front of her. She was obediently copying the three-character classic. Renbochin looked at Erhua's movements and knew that she was suspended in the air. He reckoned that her butt was swollen from being beaten by the Empress and didn't dare to sit. Xanzhou will be back in 2 days. At that time, it won't be easy for her to escape. Renbochin smiled at the Empress. Xanzhou. The Empress relaxed a little when she heard this name. It had been 3 years. Back then, the Empress had sent her and Lin Chaola to the mines in a fit of anger. It was about time for them to return. The Empress always felt that Xianzhe was more trustworthy. Just like Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, who were lively and clever back then, they were now 30 years old. However, the Empress was still reluctant to let them out of the palace. As for the two of them, they were used to staying in the palace and had no intention of going out. Has your Majesty regretted letting her out for so many years? Renbaqian asked with a smile as he sat opposite the Empress. The Empress rolled her eyes at him. Whose fault was this? She said, meritorious service should be rewarded, and mistakes should be punished. Hua, who was at the side, pricked up her ears and listened to the conversation between her father and mother. Who was Xianzhe? She stopped what she was doing. The Empress glanced at her, and Hua shivered. She pouted her lips and continued copying the three-character classic with a look of deep hatred. She hated the person who wrote this book to the core. 2 days later, 2 women sat on jumping sheep and entered the city under the protection of a group of guards. One of them was wearing shabby clothes, a pair of glasses, and her hair was tied up simply at the back of her head. She looked around curiously. It had changed. It was very different from before she left. Apart from the tractor she saw on the road, Lawn City had also changed a lot. The most obvious change was that it was livelier. The shops on both sides of Jingyang Street that were originally closed were now open. From time to time, people from the Yun Nation and the Jing tribe could be seen greeting customers in the shops. There were fewer people fighting. Both sides of the road were crowded with pedestrians, and one would bump into someone every few steps. Originally, there should have been a fight, but she didn't see any fighting after walking for so long. As she walked, a sweet fragrance wafted into her nose. Lin Chaola, who was originally drowsy on her mount, suddenly had her ears pricked up. She even trembled, and saliva dripped down her face. Following the smell, she saw that it was the imperial pastries. When Zhao Prince Consort came last year, he said that the imperial pastries were opened in the city and that Lin Chaola would definitely like this place. A gust of wind blew past Xianzhe, and Lin Chaola was nowhere to be seen. A moment later, Lin Chaola came out of the imperial pastries with a handful of sweets in her arms. Xianzhe frowned. Actually, she didn't like Lin Chaola very much as she was too lazy. Furthermore, she was robbing the imperial shop. Did she want to go to the mines and bask in the sun for a few more years? Before she could finish her thoughts, a lady in white rushed out of the imperial pastries. She was about 17 or 18 years old and extremely beautiful. Coupled with her white wide-sleeved robe, she looked like a fairy from a painting. However, at this moment, she had a murderous look on her face. Lin Chaola. You actually came back and even dared to snatch my sweets. Lin Chaola didn't pay attention to her at all. In a flash, she jumped onto the roof and dashed toward the imperial palace. Bastard! I'm not done with you. The young lady was furious, but she couldn't catch up with Lin Chaola. She could only stand on the roof and watch Lin Chaola's disappearing figure. She clenched her teeth and swore that she would definitely take revenge. Xianzhe recognized the young lady the moment she came out. She was Tong Lan. She also frequently entered the imperial palace. Although she had grown up quite a bit, her features were still there. When she saw the imperial palace in front of her, Xianzhe felt refreshed. She was finally back. Lin Chaola was squatting in front of the imperial palace. Her cheeks were still bulging, and Xianzhe didn't know how much sweets she had stuffed in. Commander, you're back. The imperial guards shouted when they saw Xianzhe. I'm not the commander. Xianzhe waved her hand. She was still a nobody. Commander, you might not know this, but but Commander Jiang has been promoted and transferred to the Protectorate of the South, a guard immediately said with a smile. Commander Jiang was Jiang Ningyun, the champion of the lantern-grabbing contest back then and the commander of the Imperial Guards for the past 3 years. Before Axayanja returned, Jiang Ningyun had been promoted and transferred to the Protectorate of the South. The significance of this was self-evident. Her Majesty's trust in Commander has not decreased at all, another guard said. When Axayanja heard this, her eyebrows twitched slightly, and a warm feeling flowed through her heart. She would be able to see Her Majesty and Zhao Prince Consort soon. She wondered what the child of Her Majesty and Zhao Prince Consort would be like. Axayanja's expression was still cold, but her heart was very warm. Chapter 1008. Axayanja, Lin Chaola, received the decree. As soon as Axayanja and Lin Chaola entered the palace, they were stopped by a group of guards. Apart from the leader, there was another person behind him carrying a tray. Axayanja was stunned. She cupped her hands respectfully and said, Axayanja accepts the decree. Her Majesty has decreed that Axayanja will be reinstated as the commander of the Imperial Palace Guards and Lin Chaola will be reinstated as the librarian of Qingxin Palace Hall. The two of them will take up their posts immediately. The Imperial Guard cupped his hands at the two of them and said, Congratulations, Commander and Librarian Lin. His Majesty wants the two of you to take a bath and change your clothes before having an audience with him. Yes. Axayanja replied. He lowered his head and looked at his shabby clothes. It was indeed not suitable for him to meet His Majesty. It seemed that His Majesty had already thought of this. Axayanja's armor, the token from the palace, and Lin Chaola's clothes were on the tray. The commander's residence in the palace is still there. Nothing has changed, the guard said. Reporting to Your Majesty, Axayanja will have an audience with the Emperor after bathing and changing her clothes. Axayanja cupped her hands in greeting and took the tray. With the imperial edict and token, she could be considered to have been reinstated. After that, Axayanja didn't need anyone to lead her. She was familiar with the palace, so she carried the token back to her residence in the palace. Along the way, all the guards she met bowed respectfully to her. Although Axayanja had just returned, she was still their leader in their hearts. When he returned to his courtyard, it was clean. It seemed that someone had just cleaned it. Axayanja went to the courtyard to fetch water for a bath. She had never relied on others to do these things before. After taking a bath and changing her clothes, Axayanja carefully caressed the familiar armor before putting it on again. He walked out of the courtyard and called for a guard, Where's Librarian Lin? As soon as she asked the question, she knew that there was no need to ask anymore. He went straight to Qingxin Palace Hall. Sure enough, Lin Chaola was lying face down in the courtyard with the tray thrown aside. Only the candy that she snatched from Tong Lan was still tightly clenched in her hand. Axayanja didn't hold back and kicked him. The hairs on Lin Chaola's body stood on end. She jumped up and struck with her claw. This move wasn't very effective against Rinpochen, so it was even more useless against Axayanja. Put on your clothes and follow me to see Her Majesty. Axayanja said coldly. Only then did Lin Chaola remember that she still had something to do. He changed into his clothes in the yard, yawned, and said, Let's go. The eerie old woman sitting on the second floor of Qingxin Palace twitched her ears and cursed, This girl has forgotten who picked her up. Although Supervisor Lin's feelings for Lin Chaola were like that of a kitten or puppy, but she didn't expect that the lass would fall asleep in the courtyard when she came back, and then she went to see His Majesty, completely forgetting about her. For a moment, he felt that he had raised an ingrate all these years. The two of them headed to the Azure Cloud Palace, which was the current location of the Empress. Originally, the Emperor's sleeping quarters were located in the center of the palace. After it collapsed, they moved to the west side, and when the west side collapsed, they moved to the east side. Over the past few years, the interior of the palace had been demolished and rebuilt, and Renbachien and the Empress could be considered to be living in less than half of the palace. Counting the number of palaces that the Hao nation's emperors had lived in for more than a dozen generations, the total number of palaces that they had lived in was probably less than that of 2 emperors. Now, the entire palace was waiting for the new palace to be built so that they wouldn't have to go through any more trouble. As for the instigator of all this, the roaring emperor was still diligently digging holes in the ground while no one was looking. The cobweb-like passageways under the palace that Honeysuckle had walked through were his masterpieces. Now, that place had become a place for Honeysuckle to explore, and he was always able to find something that tasted good. When they arrived outside the Azure Cloud Palace, the 2 of them heard a series of children cheering. They looked in the direction of the sound and saw a 7 or 8-year-old child jumping up and down along the trees in the courtyard. In a short while, the child jumped in front of the 2 of them and looked at them curiously. Looking at the pair of phoenix eyes that were exactly the same as the Empress's, the 2 of them knew who this child was. Xiange also squeezed out a smile and said, "Princess. Who are you?" Honeysuckle looked up at Xiange curiously, sniffed, and his attention was quickly attracted by something else. She moved her feet and appeared in front of Lin Chaola. She circled around her and reached for the bag of sweets on Lin Chaola's waist. This bag was given to her by Renbachien, and it just so happened to contain the sweets that she had snatched from Tong Lan. Smack! Honeysuckle stared at the bag at Lin Chaola's waist and felt a pain in his hand. Lin Chaola's ears trembled, and she bared her canine teeth. "It's mine." Honeysuckle was stunned. After being in the palace for so long, this was the first time that someone actually hit her without giving her anything. For a moment, she forgot to cry. "This is the princess." Xiange's face turned cold, and she really wanted to give her a kick. "I'm also a secretary," Lin Chaola said disapprovingly. "I've always been the one robbing others. When has anyone ever robbed me?" Xiange's expression changed. "The princess is still a child." Lin Chaola rolled her eyes, covered the bag of sweets with one hand, and said, "Who isn't a child? She wasn't even an adult yet." Xiange almost choked to death. If Her Majesty wasn't inside, she would have had a fight with her first. She glared at Xiange and went to see Her Majesty first before finding an opportunity to keep an eye on her. Xiange had known for a long time that Lin Chaola was a secretary in Qingxin Palace Hall, but the 2 of them had never interacted much. After going to the mines for 3 years, Xiange finally knew what kind of person Lin Chaola was. Her impression of Lin Chaola had long since dropped to the freezing point. Zhao Prince Consort could tolerate her, but Xiange couldn't, given her rigid character. Honeysuckle finally came to her senses. She pouted and wanted to cry, but she was afraid that her father would hear her and scold her again. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked around. With a slight movement, she arrived at the flower bed. She reached down with her small hands and pulled out a finger-long earth dragon from the soil. Swap! Honeysuckle stretched out her hand and looked at Lin Chaola expectantly. No! Lin Chaola covered the bag of sweets. She wasn't interested in insects. More tears welled up in Honeysuckle's eyes. She jumped onto the tree and grabbed a one-horned beetle. She raised her little hand in front of Lin Chaola and said, "Swap." No. Xiange's face started to turn ashen. Even if she had to risk being punished by Her Majesty, she had to teach this unruly person a lesson. Honeysuckle's eyes were red and her nose was sniffling. She looked like she was about to cry. After thinking for a long time, she climbed up the tree and took down something the size of an adult's palm. Xiange's mouth twitched. She could clearly see that it was a skinned and dried rat. Many Aborigines ate this kind of thing, but who would dare to let this little princess eat it? Swap. Honeysuckle looked at Lin Chowla stubbornly. Sure. Lin Chowla beamed with joy the moment she saw the thing. She carefully took out a piece of candy from the bag of sweets and stuffed it into Honeysuckle's hand. Then, she snatched the dried rat from her hand and hung it on her waist. We're even. Lin Chowla said with a smile. Honeysuckle looked at the nail-sized piece of candy in her hand. She didn't feel that it was a loss to exchange such a big dried rat for it. She directly threw the candy into her mouth and squinted her eyes. She knew the meaning of happiness just by looking at her face. Her Majesty wants both of you to have an audience. At this moment, the guard's voice sounded. Xianja glared at Lin Chowla unwillingly before turning around and walking in silently. Please remember the domain name of this book. Wonderful Bookhouse mobile version website. Chapter 1009. Your Majesty. Your Highness. Xianja greeted her, and Lin Chowla followed suit. Only in front of the Empress could Lin Chowla be a little proper. Of course, it was only a little, and it wouldn't last long. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been mining for 3 years instead of 1 year. However, Lin Chowla felt wronged. She was sleepy, and she couldn't control herself. What could she do? The Empress looked at the two of them and said faintly, "No need to be so polite. From the looks of it, you two have changed over the past 3 years." She was in a good mood, but she didn't show it. Xianja looked like she had been through a lot, and her eyes were a little different from before. As for Lin Chowla, she was tan because she slept on the roof every day. The Empress was naturally aware of their behavior. However, she couldn't be bothered with Lin Chowla. Being banished for 3 years was enough for her. You made a big mistake, so I naturally have to punish you and ask you to reflect on it. Now that you are back and have been punished, I have restored you to your original positions, which means that I trust you. If you make any more mistakes, it will be a slap to my face. Do you understand? The Empress stared at the two of them. Your Majesty, I will do my best. I won't let you down. Xianja cupped her hands. Me too. Lin Chowla quickly followed. Where did that rat behind you come from? Renbochin asked with a faint smile. In fact, the Empress had already heard what had just happened outside and told Renbochin about it. In other words, Lin Chowla really didn't learn from her mistakes. However, the Water Empress was clear that this was the character of this lass. Lin Chowla immediately said righteously, "This is to tell the little princess that you can't reap without hard work. Didn't you make me do a lot of things in the past before giving me 2 pieces of candy?" Xianja glared at her. She had tolerated Lin Chowla for a long time, but she was still so rude in front of the Empress. Renbochin thought about it carefully and felt that this was indeed the case. Lin Chowla could be said to be the cheapest spirit will expert. Her salary was the same as a librarian in the palace, and she only received a few pieces of candy as a reward. With this thought, Renbochin didn't say anything more. Forget it. You've just returned. You should familiarize yourselves first. In the past few years, the palace and Lawn City have also undergone some changes, the Empress said. These words were mainly directed at Xianja. As for Lin Chowla, she was just changing a place to sleep. The Empress waved her hand to dismiss them, shook her head, and said, "Lin Chowla is still the same. Doesn't Her Majesty already know?" Renbochin laughed. The Empress pondered for a while and said, "I'm too lenient toward her. I still need to find an opportunity to discipline her." In fact, when the Empress was young, Lin Chowla was already about the same age as she was now. When the Empress first saw her, she felt that she was like an elder sister. Of course, this feeling didn't last long. It lasted for about a day. When the two left, they saw two flowers again. Next to Hua was a young woman in a silk dress who didn't look gentle at all. She held a fruit in one hand and placed it next to Hua's mouth with the other. Your Highness, I am Xianjia. From today onwards, I will be the commander of the palace guards. Xianjia greeted the two flowers. Honeysuckle thought for a moment. Oh. He continued to nibble on the fruit. Xianjia smiled, bowed to two flowers, and then left. As for Lin Chaola, she yawned and swayed her feet as she followed. Before he could walk 100 meters, Xianjia kicked him without any warning. Lin Chaola was startled, jumped up a tree, and asked, "What are you doing? If you are so rude again, I will definitely teach you etiquette." Xianjia said with a cold face. As if you know etiquette. Tell me, what does etiquette in the palace include? I don't owe you money. Lin Chaola snorted. Don't forget that she was a scholar of Qingxin Palace Hall. Even though she slept for a living, she would occasionally read a few books when she was awake. Xianjia was stunned and stumped by Lin Chaola's question. She stood there and pondered for a while before turning around and leaving. That night, Renbaqian was stunned when he heard Xianjia's request. Xianjia wanted to learn etiquette from the palace. In his impression, Xianjia was a woman who didn't know anything other than practicing martial arts and doing her job. Today, she was actually enlightened and wanted to learn etiquette from the palace. What kind of stimulation was this? However, this was a small matter. He immediately agreed and informed the female official. The female official in charge of etiquette in the palace was probably so bored that she was going to rot. Xianjia sulked. From the next day onward, she would spend an hour learning etiquette every day. I'm finally going to graduate. Du Laolu showed an exaggerated expression. 7 years, 7 years. What have I been doing for the past 6 years? Algebra, geometry, physics, and chemistry. I'm going crazy. I really don't know how I managed to endure it. If it weren't for my father's disapproval, I would have graduated 3 years ago and lived a good life. Su Ping said angrily. These days, the highest-ranking students in the academy began to get excited. After enduring for 7 years, they could finally graduate. Everyone was excited, as if they were about to start a new life. They could finally say goodbye to Yague. They could finally say goodbye to those damn classes. They could finally stop doing homework. The students who were about to leave the abyss of misery began to become bolder and would hang around Renbaqian from time to time. They only wanted to express one thing, bite me. In any case, they would graduate in half a month. Tong Lan, who was wearing a white coat, sat there and proofread the drawings in her hands. Without looking up, she said, "Isn't it too early for all of you to be happy? We haven't even graduated yet. It's not early anymore. There are only 10 more days." Du Laolu stretched out his hand and gestured 10. Don't be too ostentatious. Be careful that extreme joy begets sorrow. For example, you can only graduate if you pass the exam. Shirgan smiled at everyone. Shirgan, who was originally delicate and pretty, had now become burly and had a full beard. It looked like his brain was full of muscles. However, all the students knew that Shirgan had the best overall qualities among this batch of students. Whether it was his academic results, ability to handle affairs, or even dealing with people, Shirgan was extremely good at them. If anyone thought that he was as straightforward as he looked, they wouldn't even know that they were tricked by him. It's just an exam. Du Laolu laughed and said confidently, at most, we can take a makeup exam. We will pass after a few more times. Many students gave him the middle finger. This was what they learned from the manga. Seeing how confident he was, they thought that he was confident about the exam, but it turned out that he was confident about the makeup exam. While everyone was chatting and laughing, Renbochin came to the door, saw the lively classroom, and knocked on the door with a strange smile. Yague is here. Everyone immediately sat back in their seats. Although he was about to graduate, Renbochin's prestige was still there. We will graduate in 10 days. Does anyone have any thoughts? Renbochin walked to the podium and smiled. We can't bear to part with Principal Ren. Someone blurted out. Everyone immediately looked strange. Couldn't bear to part with Yague. They wished they could never see him again in this life. I can't bear to part with all of you either. Renbochin acted as if he didn't see the strange expressions on everyone's faces. Everyone's hearts tightened. Yague wouldn't be up to something, right? However, all good things must come to an end. Renbochin smiled at everyone. Everyone finally felt a little relieved, and a relaxed smile appeared on their faces once again. However, before you graduate, I have something to inform all of you. Renbochin's eyes were smiling. He had been watching the excitement of these students for the past few days. However, in order not to disturb their excitement, there was something that he hadn't told them. It was time to tell them now. Please speak, Principal Ren. Everyone looked relaxed. It didn't matter what the notice was. After all, there were only 10 days left. Everyone could finally escape from the abyss of suffering. First of all, congratulations to all of you for graduating from Black Bamboo Academy's high school. You can be said to be the first batch of highly educated people in Dayo, Renbochin said. Everyone nodded their heads. They were still confident about this. Although 7 years was tough, they did learn a lot. They were still very grateful to Renbochin for this. Next, I will announce one more thing. Renbochin looked at everyone. In 10 days. Black Bamboo Academy. Renbochin kept them guessing, paused for a moment, and then said with a smile, we will establish a university department. Everyone was shocked. What? Congratulations to all of you for bidding farewell to high school and starting a brand new, university life. Renbochin was pleased to see that everyone's expressions froze. This included Tonglan and Shirgan. Everyone widened their eyes and looked at Renbochin. Principal. What? Under normal circumstances, you will spend 3 years in middle school, 3 years in high school, and university will be missing. 4 years later, you will truly become the top talents of Dayo. Ha! Everyone's expression changed drastically as they exclaimed. University. There are still 4 years left. Everyone, who was originally excited about graduating, felt as if they had been struck by lightning. All of them were crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. These 3 years in high school were already countless times more difficult than middle school. They had suffered countless beatings and punishments before they could finally graduate. But now, Yague was telling them that there was still university. There were still 4 years left. Even in the hot Dayo, everyone felt as if they had been splashed with a basin of ice water from head to toe. Of course, you can also enter the various departments after graduating from high school. You'd better go back and discuss this with your families. Of course, I will also listen to your family's opinions. Renbochin smiled amiably. Drop out of high school and enter the various departments? Even if they were willing, would their families be willing? Ha! Graduation. Hee hee. Do you think you can graduate? Do you think you can graduate in 4 years? Looking at their expressions, Renbochin was very happy. He had endured for so long just to tell them this touching news today. Well, I should be able to play around again in 4 years. Let me tell you that there is an advanced profession called masters. There is also an advanced profession called doctors. After that, there is an advanced profession called Saint Seiya. Alright, school is over. Renbochin strolled out of the door, leaving behind a group of completely petrified students. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 1010. That day, after school, the students of this year's batch were all pale, their eyes lifeless as they floated out. After 6 years of suffering, they thought that they could finally see the light, but they found that they were greeted by an even deeper darkness. Thinking about the next 4 years, everyone wanted to cry but had no tears. The students of the other batches were puzzled at first. These seniors had been in high spirits recently, so why did they suddenly look like they were living a life worse than death? When they found out about the situation, all of their faces turned pale. The future of these seniors was also their future. Some people were living a life worse than death, and naturally, some people were happy. For example, Zhang Kaixian really liked this place. With the teachers around, the students were also interesting, could learn all kinds of interesting things, and could even go to the library to read interesting comics. She didn't like to work in any department, and her family wasn't short of money. It couldn't be better for her to continue studying in this school. 10 days later, the first batch of students graduated again. However, this time, the graduation party was much simpler. This time, all the students from ordinary families, except for one person, chose to graduate. After all, for them and their families, this level of learning was enough. Another 4 years of learning was too much for them. After all, the family situation of ordinary people couldn't support them to continue studying like this. They didn't want it to be like this. Dayo was currently undergoing changes. Lawn City and Dayo were different every month. When they were at the school, they often wanted to participate in the changes as they watched from the sidelines. Therefore, they chose to graduate and work in the 6 departments. Renbochin understood this very well. As for the descendants of the influential families, none of the successful ones graduated. All of them entered university. Amidst the wailing, the first thing that greeted them was the entrance exam in a month's time. At this time, in the imperial court, a group of people had their eyes on a small table in the center. On the table was a black box with a disc with numbers from 0 to 9 written on it. There was also a wire on the box that connected it to the outside of the hole. Renbochin held the microphone on the box with one hand and rotated the disc with the other. After a while, a beeping sound came from the microphone. After only one ring, the other end was picked up. Your Highness. We succeeded. Renbochin looked at everyone and smiled. Before anyone could react, the person on the other end of the phone cheered. Renbochin said a few words of encouragement to the other end of the phone before hanging up and looking at everyone in the hall with a smile. Your Highness, isn't this the same as the radio station from before? Shi Qing asked. Although Renbochin didn't explain, they had already guessed the purpose of this box. No, a radio station is a radio station. The radio station is where we talk to each other in different channels. It is a fixed frequency communication. There were a few disadvantages. First, the number of fixed frequencies was limited, and the radio station could not be used by everyone. Secondly, if someone else got their hands on the radio, they would be able to hear the conversation on the channel. Although this had not happened before, it did not mean that it would not happen in the future. Thirdly, the radio station's ability to resist interference is weak. For example, radio stations can't be used in Tianjin Basin. They didn't understand the technology and didn't understand the meaning behind his words. However, from Renbochin's words, he could tell that this box was something better than a radio station. Introduce them to me, the Empress said faintly from her seat of honor. Yes. He smiled at the Empress. Then, he turned around and said, "This is a telephone, which is used for long-distance communication like a radio station." There is no need to elaborate on the other 2 points. First, this is point-to-point communication. A telephone only needs to dial the corresponding number to communicate with any other telephone. For example, this telephone can communicate point-to-point with any department in the 6 departments or any department in any city at any time. Everything that is said can only be heard by the person at the other end of the line. Everyone nodded. This time, they understood. The radio station was for everyone to chat together, but this telephone was for 2 people to chat privately. Second, and most importantly, the popularity of the telephone. Telephones can be installed in any place in Dayo, and there can be millions or even tens of millions of telephones. Whether it is in every department, every city, or even every household. Everyone could use a phone to dial the corresponding number to talk to one of the millions of phones out there. For example, Sir Sher can install such a telephone in his residence. As long as I have the corresponding number of Sir Sher's home telephone, I can call his residence from any place at any time and talk to him through any telephone. For example, all of you can contact him through the telephone in any corner of Lon City or Dayo. Even if you are in the 60,000 mountains, you can contact him through the telephone. After Rinpoche finished speaking, he smiled and looked at everyone. He had to wait for them to react. Although they had seen enough new things over the years, they still needed some time to digest Rinpoche's words. On Earth, the early application of the telephone was the magnet telephone, which was the kind in movies that generated electricity by hand while making a call. After that, the operator would transfer the call. After that, there was the common battery telephone, which no longer needed to generate electricity by hand. However, it still needed the operator of the telephone exchange to transfer the call manually. This kind of telephone needed to be transferred manually, so there weren't many numbers. Naturally, there weren't many users. At that time, the largest telephone exchange in Asia, Shanghai, had only a few thousand users. The biggest limitation of the telephone wasn't the technology of the telephone, but the technology of the telephone interaction. The first 2 types were manually connected. After that, there was the step-by-step switchboard, which allowed the telephone to be connected mechanically. However, there were also many shortcomings, especially the high power consumption and the difficulty of maintenance. Knowing that this kind of thing would enter millions of households sooner or later, Rinpoche naturally eliminated it. What he used was the more mature vertical and horizontal switchboard technology. In the 50s and 60s on Earth, the use of this kind of switchboard had become mainstream. In China, it was used until the 80s and 90s. Of course, this was also a technology that would be eliminated sooner or later. However, the next generation of technology required electronic technology. Rinpoche waited for a long time before the faces of everyone gradually began to change. Your Highness, do you mean that this thing can be installed in our residences? Not only in your residences, but also in everyone's homes, including those villages in the mountains. Rinpoche corrected. Of course, this was on the premise that those birds that had nothing better to do and played with wires had to be driven away. The cities were fine, but there were many beasts in the wilderness that liked to pull wires or dig holes. Everyone suddenly exclaimed. Installed such a phone in everyone's home. Please remember the domain name of this book. Com, Wonderful Book House Mobile Version. Com. Chapter 10-11. For the time being, it wasn't realistic to install telephones in thousands of households. Apart from that, the installation fee alone wasn't affordable for ordinary people, not to mention the monthly rent and communication fees. The installation fee was 50 taels of silver, and the monthly rent was 1 tael of silver. The phone bill was 60 copper coins per 5 minutes, and it was counted as 5 minutes if it was less than 5 minutes. Renbochin knew that this was the trend, and the future wasn't far away. It would be 20 to 30 years at most. However, for the time being, the main targets of telephones were the court and merchants. At the same time, there was also public telephones. Renbochin was going to install public telephones throughout Dayou, including the Yun Nation and Tianjin Basin, and use them to collect copper coins. As for the cables needed to lay telephone lines, Renbochin had made a lot of preparations for this. As early as a year ago, Renbochin introduced a new coin, a copper-clad steel alloy coin with a face value equivalent to 5 copper coins. Although countless steel rails were used to lay the railways, the price of steel was even higher than that of copper among the people. In addition, a new decree was issued that no one could refuse to accept the new coin, and those who were reported would be fined or whipped. Therefore, after a little chaos, this exquisite new coin was introduced. Taking this opportunity, Renbochin collected a large number of copper coins from the market and smelted them into cables. However, there were still a large number of copper coins circulating in the market, and the price of copper coins even rose as he collected a large number of copper coins. Next, Renbochin was going to use the coin-operated telephone to exchange the copper coins on the market for aluminum-magnesium alloy coins and completely replace the old coins with new coins. There was no other way. Compared to the lack of iron, there was a lack of copper. At present, the 2 largest copper mines were in Great Xia, and they were in the north. Renbochin wasn't interested in Great Xia, and the location of those 2 mines determined that Dayou couldn't send troops to directly occupy them. As for the copper mines in the Yun Nation, the output was still insufficient for Renbochin's needs, and the cables were currently the largest copper consumer. Renbochin could only temporarily set his sights on the copper coins in the market to solve this urgent problem. After demonstrating the telephone to many officials in court, Renbochin first gave each official a telephone in their residence, including the installation. Of course, they still had to pay the monthly rent and communication fees themselves. After that, under the Empress's instructions, the Ministry of Revenue directly ordered 1,000 telephones from Renbochin's Royal Communications Company. With the exception of the Yun Nation, all the cities and most of the important departments in the entire Dayou region had telephones. Taking advantage of the Empress's order, Renbochin ordered that every department in every city had to install a telephone. In reality, it was not a lot of money. In total, there were only about 3,000 telephones and a few 100,000 taels of silver. But he pushed the phone directly to the world. With this incident, Renbochin felt that he and the Empress were the greatest examples of collusion between officials and businessmen. Of course, as soon as the order was given, apart from 2 yuan from the Ministry of Revenue, there was no response from the Yun Nation. However, no one would disrespect the Empress on this matter. Moreover, the importance of the telephone was unparalleled. Its importance and significance were no less than that of the tractor. In fact, they were even greater. Renbochin had officially opened the door to the communication era. After the demonstration in the imperial court, Renbochin got people to lay a telephone line from Lan City to the Yun Nation while he started to promote the project. At the same time, the recruits from Tianjin Basin were also undergoing intensive training. After recruiting a large number of laborers from Tianjin Basin to build the new city, Renbochin finally began to make use of Tianjin Basin's manpower on a large scale. Between Lan City and Tianjin Basin, Renbochin also built a new city. The so-called new city was nothing more than a stretch of brick houses and factories without even a fence. Of course, this was also the standard for future cities. Without walls, not only would it save a lot of manpower and material resources, but it would also facilitate expansion. At present, this new city was mainly responsible for the production of telephones and electric wires. Rubber was sent here from the Qin Nation, which saved about 700 to 800 kilometers compared to sending it to Lan City. Furthermore, Rinpoche was already preparing to build a new factory near the Protectorate of the Southeast that would be responsible for processing rubber. The mist is heavy today, and the country is deep here. The sound of the beach is more urgent than the autumn, and the air of the gorge is more cloudy. Looking at the watchtower, the clouds cover the eyes, and the heart is homesick with raindrops. How can I comfort my loneliness? I depend on the zither of the north. Overflowing with emotion, touching the heart, the sentences are neat and natural. I don't know who wrote this poem, but it's worthy of the name of a famous person. In a restaurant, a few scholars sat around a table, and one of them clapped his hands and praised. It's really not bad. It should be written by Zhao Prince Consort. He's not an aboriginal, so it's not surprising that he could write such a poem in a foreign land. He has a beauty in his arms and great power. I'm afraid he's enjoying it. Someone chuckled. A beauty in his arms. That's not necessarily the case. How could Her Majesty be a warm, fragrant, and soft jade? Someone looked around and chuckled. It's better not to talk about these things, an old man said while paying attention to his surroundings. If others heard about the emperor in private, they would immediately be in big trouble. I've long heard that Zhao Prince Consort is proficient in miscellaneous arts, but I didn't expect him to be proficient in poetry. The way of poetry only cultivates one's temperament and isn't beneficial to governing the country. Someone shook his head. What do you think about that telephone? Everyone was discussing a poem that had been circulating in the city recently. There was another sentence at the end of the poem. Homesickness. Make a call home. One poem, one sentence, had brought this new thing, the telephone, directly to the front of everyone. This poem and this sentence were printed on a piece of paper with a picture of a telephone at the bottom. On the back of the paper was a brief introduction of the telephone, as well as the locations of the Royal Telephone Service offices in the various cities of the Yun Nation. As soon as this advertising flyer appeared, it immediately caused an uproar in the entire Yun Nation. It's really incredible to be able to use this to communicate from thousands of miles away. I wonder if it's true. Someone said. It can't be false. This matter has already spread throughout the Yun Nation. If it's false, then it will become a laughing stock. How could Zhao Prince Consort be so unwise? I heard that the city commander's residence has already ordered the installation of the telephone. Based on the time, it will be installed in 5 to 7 days. We will know the specifics when the time comes. If it's really as described on that piece of paper, this telephone is really amazing. In the future, no matter what happens anywhere, Lon City will immediately know and orders will be issued. It's scary just thinking about it. You guys don't know, a young man said in a low voice, do you think this kind of thing only exists? In fact, it has existed for a long time. I heard from my uncle that the city commander once went to the Protectorate of the Northeast for an urgent matter and received a reply within 15 minutes. A few days later, the city commander received the same decree. Even if we don't talk about this, you guys can study the movements of the troops from the Protectorate of the Northeast during the war a few years ago. Stop talking. Someone stopped him. It's useless to talk about this matter. It's not our place to discuss it. Be careful not to invite trouble. Brother Zhu, you're too careful. This matter can be detected as long as someone has the intention. Do you think you can stop the world from talking about it? The scholar said disapprovingly. However, this telephone is also good for us. In the future, if we go out to travel, it's very convenient to call home and ask about the recent situation. That's true. Traveling is just to increase one's knowledge. In the end, it still has to be sold to the imperial family. Now that the Yun Nation is gone and the examination is also gone, I don't know where we can go. Someone sighed. As soon as this was said, everyone immediately quieted down. Chapter 10-12. The Yun nation had been gone for 6 years. In the past 6 years, these scholars had been greatly affected. It could be said that his entire fate had changed. They learned the arts and sold them to the emperor's family, but where were they selling them to now? Until now, no one from the Yun nation had become an official in the imperial court of Dayo, and there was no such thing as a major examination in Dayo. It could be said that their path had been blocked. It was also because of this that there were so many scholars who lingered in the brothels, leading a befuddled life. Some of those who were born in large clans were either looking for a way out in the current city magistrates' mansions, or continuing their studies. Those whose family conditions were not good in the first place would simply become a shopkeeper for a merchant or go farming. Originally, the scholars still had some allowances from the imperial court, but now they could only make a living on their own. Although the people present were all of good backgrounds, when they thought of the current situation of those commoner scholars, they all felt sad. As for his own future, he had no idea what it would be like. It's a pity that the royal family of the Xia dynasty is in decline. Otherwise, we could go to the Xia dynasty to find a way out. Someone sighed. Even though they didn't want to leave their homes, if there was really no way out, Great Xia was also a place to go. Furthermore, the Yun nation originated from Great Xia. It wasn't that the people of the Yun nation couldn't accept returning to Great Xia. Unfortunately, the Great Xia dynasty was still at war, and the Great Xia dynasty was still in a weak position. Ever since the rebel army had food, they immediately won over the hearts of the people. It was said that in the territory occupied by the rebels, no one died of starvation. Just this alone was enough to tempt many commoners. The rebel army had food, but the imperial court did not. After a few years, the rebels had already occupied 2/3 of the territory, and the imperial court of the Great Xia dynasty was declining. Perhaps in a few years, even the imperial court of the Great Xia dynasty would no longer exist. Under such circumstances, how would the scholars of the Yun nation be willing to go to Great Xia? It could be said that even their last path had been cut off. A few years ago, the Yun nation was prosperous and Great Xia was at its peak. Emperor Xia Bailong, was bent on getting rid of Dayo. Who would have thought that a few years later, Xia Baichong would die, the Great Xia dynasty would be in danger, and the Yun nation would lose its country. Dayo, which used to be backward and barbaric, was now flourishing. At this moment, no one in Dayo's imperial court cared about what the scholars from the Yun nation thought. Everyone's attention was drawn to the recently installed telephone. Ever since this thing was installed, if there was anything else, they didn't even need to send anyone. They could just make a phone call. Only then did everyone understand how much of an impact this thing would have on the future. Tong Jinya watched as the installation was completed. Without waiting for them to test it, he grabbed them and dialed the palace's number. This is the royal family. Name. A man's rough voice came from the other end of the line. The imperial family was different from other families. They had to report their names before they would be transferred to His Majesty or someone else. Otherwise, if others knew the number of the royal family and called them every day, who could stand it? I am Tong Jinya. Tong Jinya beamed with joy. He had already used this thing in the Ministry of Works, but it felt especially refreshing to install it in his own home. Oh, it's Minister Tong. What's the matter? I'm just giving it a try. Tong Jinya chuckled and hung up the phone. The face of the operator on the other end of the line twitched. After hanging up the phone, Tong Jinya continued to call the Ministry of Works. Then, he called Shiqing, Kozhihai, Tu Wan, and Zhui Yan according to the paper pasted on the wall. Some of them got through, while others couldn't because the telephone hadn't been installed yet. After making one round of calls, Tong Jinya dialed Qin Chuan's number with a mischievous look on his face. The phone was picked up after ringing for a while. Qin Chuan's voice came from the other end of the line. This thing just rang. Did someone call? Idiot. Tong Jinya beamed with joy. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then, Qin Chuan's thunderous roar could be heard. Ignorant Tong, how dare you call me? In fact, Tong Jinya could hear Qin Chuan's voice clearly even after he hung up the phone. Their mansions weren't far apart, and they were only separated by the residence of the Ministry of Rights Minister. Idiot son, bite me. Tong Jinya laughed heartily. Ignorant old man, you are simply courting death. If I see you, I'll tear down that big dragon bone on your back and use it as a crutch. The big dragon bone referred to the spine, and the Aboriginals like to call it the big dragon bone. I didn't expect to hear your flustered and exasperated expression while I was drinking tea at home. Shenghong, give me some more tea. Idiot, you can't see me, so what's the use of shouting? Zhao Prince Consort has a good saying, a dog that bites doesn't bark. Aw 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 aw. Just you wait, ignorant old man. I'm going to teach you a lesson today. Tong Jinya heard the sound of something smashing on the other end of the line. He wondered if that old man had smashed the phone. In less than 30 breaths, an angry roar came from the top of the Tong residence. Ignorant old man, come out now. I'm going to tear your mouth apart today. Tong Jinya looked out and saw Qin Chuan standing on the roof with a knife, looking for him. Needless to say, there was a routine fight. From that day onwards, Tong Jinya had another hobby. He would call Qin Chuan every night when he had nothing to do. The Xiong residence, which was situated between the Qin residence and the Tong residence, could be heard cursing at night from both sides. Even though they were using the phone, their cursing could be heard across half of Beihong district. Most of the cursing would end up in a brawl. After a few days, Xiong Yaohe cursed in court with dark circles under his eyes. In the end, the Empress gave both of them 50 strokes of the paddle each. She really gave both of them 50 strokes of the paddle, not one less. However, to the two of them, who had thick skin and flesh, 50 strokes of the paddle was no different from scratching an itch. The cursing continued every night. Then, the cursing turned into a 3-person cursing. Now, it was the others who went to court with dark circles under their eyes. This farce continued until Tong Jinya and Qin Chuan were surrounded and beaten up by everyone. Before that, the Yun nation had also opened a phone line. In Luoya City, in addition to the warlord, all the officials were gathered around a table in the middle. Is this the phone? It's such a big thing. What's this string for? It's said to transmit sound. Can this string transmit sound all the way to Lon City? Won't we know after we try? Wait a while. The city guards have installed one too. Let's try it after it's done. Send someone to ask if it's ready. The city guards will need another day to install it. Why don't we try somewhere else? All right, shut up, the warlord said faintly. Then, he took out a small book from his pocket, flipped through a few pages, and turned the dial on the phone according to the numbers on it. Those with sharp eyes could see the words Dayo's address book written on it. After a while, a beeping sound came from the other end of the phone. The room immediately quieted down. Everyone pricked up their ears to see if this thing could really talk to people thousands of miles away. Who is it? When the other end of the phone was connected, everyone held their breath. The warlord was distracted for a moment, but the call was actually connected. Then, he immediately said, "Is this the residence of Sanjiang City's mayor?" "This is the residence of Sanjiang City's mayor." "Who are you?" "I'm Su Ping from Luoya City." "Is Brother Shen around?" "Warlord Su." "I'm sorry. I'll inform the warlord right away." The person on the other end of the phone was surprised at first, then hurriedly replied. Currently, there were two positions in the Yun Nation, the warlord and the mayor. The group that had surrendered back then had all kept their positions as city lords. Those who were promoted later on were called the mayor. Although they had the same authority as the warlord, whether they could sit in this position depended on the imperial court. At this moment, everyone in the room was surprised. They actually fought their way to Sanjiang City. Hearing about it was one thing, but seeing it with their own eyes was another. With this thing, even if they were separated by two places, they could still contact each other at will. Many people were thinking that they should also install one at home. Although 50 taels of silver wasn't a small amount, it wasn't much to them. Su Ping chatted with the Sanjiang City's mayor for a while. Both of them found this kind of conversation thousands of miles away very refreshing. After a while, Su Ping put down the phone and sighed. Zhao Prince Consort is really a celestial being. Thank you to Rolling Round for the tip. Thank you to Air Go Wa for the tip. Genius 1 second to remember this website's address. Mobile version, you're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.